Number 10. What a drag. Bachelor number 1. What would you do if I refused to marry you? Well, I would probably get quite violent and lead to the destruction of 10,000 lives at the Battle of Hastings. Might just drag you around by your hair and see where the night goes. William I, or more appropriate, William the Conqueror, was a fierce warrior and the first Norman king of England. Being the illegitimate child he was to the throne, some people didn't exactly respect the power moves old Willie was making. People rebelled, and he crushed them. Oh, and there was this one time that he fancied a woman named Matilda. Being the respected woman that she was, she declined Willie's advances. Willie, not taking no for an answer, promptly dragged her around by the hair until she agreed to marry him. Gee, what a swell guy. Number 9. Let them eat cake. France had seen better days in the 1790s. People were starving, the economy was bust, and for some reason the poorest citizens were being taxed the most. When cries were made from the people, they demanded that change be made. King Louis XVI, being the great leader he was, he listened to the people and there was no problem ever again. Oh wait, he did nothing and the country had a bloody revolution. The man supposed to be leading his people failed to act. In fact, he did less than nothing, often trying to silence the riots by force. But when people are very hungry, and you're living fat with high society, you can lose your head in all that chaos. While the famous quote, "let them eat cake," may not have actually been said, it's a good reminder of the disconnect between the upper class and poor. Leaving your people to starve isn't the best idea if you want to be a king for a long time. Number 8. Cashback. King George III had a simple ask of the American colonies. Right then, we just saved you all from the French and Indians, so now it's time to do the right thing and pick up the bill. Britain introduced new taxes on the colonies in order to pay back what it had spent on the previous war. But in reality, he was asking the colonies to pay up without much in return. Basically, I'm the king, I saved your skins, give me more money, which most people at the time couldn't afford. And I'm still gonna boss you around. The British Empire may have been victorious, but it was the colonists who felt all the effects of the war and the economy. This happened multiple times before some patriots had had enough and decided to act. And what he did when the people he was forcing to give money spilt a little tea? Well, he sent British troops for a semi-friendly military occupation. I'd hate to loan this guy a nickel. Number 7. Terrible Ivan. He wasn't called Ivan the very friendly and generous and would for sure never cause any harm to anyone ever. He was Ivan the Terrible, and for good reason. His actions are very unholy. Let's start with the fact that he killed his son's pregnant wife. And when his son came to confront dear old dad, his son was struck with a pointed staff, killing him in a fit of rage. A legend tells us that once St. Basil's Cathedral was finished construction, he was so pleased with the architect, to reward him for such magnificent work, Ivan gouged his eyes out so that no one would ever design something so beautiful again. His paranoia also caused the slaughter of Novgorod, where after he was done claiming thousands of lives, he burned all the fields just for good measure. Wouldn't want all those dead people farming without your permission. Should we tell him about the other world monuments? Number 6. Off with her head! Henry VIII is more well known for how he treated his wives more than his leadership. With a reign of over 20 years, the man had a few wives. 2 of his wives were executed for ridiculous reasons, another was divorced. Turns out, actually, the church wouldn't grant that divorce he was looking for. So Henry went and did the next best thing. He broke away from the Catholic Church and dissolved the monasteries, taking their wealth and redistributing it as he saw fit. Nothing is unholier than trying to get away from the church. Historians believe that his divorce actually led to the English Reformation.
In our number 5 spot today, we have Christian VII. Christian. An ironic name for what I'm about to tell you. The young prince that couldn't keep his hands out of his pants. Let's mention him. Christian VII of Denmark, he was, as I said, a wee young lad, and of course a wee bit spoiled. Very comfortable with his body though, I'll say. More often than not, he would just have his hands in his pants. Middle of dinner, passing food around to his family, alternating hands in the pants to hands on food. This should have been number 1, now that I think of it. What a little shit. It's unknown, but historians believe maybe he was a wee bit mad. Who's to tell? Either way, don't touch the rye bread, Christian. Thanks so much. In our number 4 spot today, we have King Henry VIII. Of course, we have to talk about Henry VIII. He's pretty bad. Henry VIII was the King of England from 1509 to 1547. He's been married a handful of times and they all went south. When Henry married Catherine Howard, he was 49 and Catherine was a lot younger. Classic 1500s stuff. After the two were married, Henry was not the same as he was when they had met. He had since received a nasty jousting wound to the face, was gravely overweight, and never wanted to do anything with Catherine. So Catherine, of course, just wanting some shred of a life, and being, again, quite young, decided to look for love. Well, God forbid. God forbid you try and have a life in the 1500s. The young queen was accused of having an affair and was publicly and horribly taken out in the courtyard. She was accused of cheating before they even got married, and in turn, lost her head. Horrible times. In our number 3 spot today, we have Don Carlos. Prince of Asturias in the mid-1500s, the Spanish prince who just enjoyed being the worst human alive. Back in the mid-1500s, the eldest son to King Philip II of Spain was a horrible person. Now, it's been noted that he was born with a hunchback and one leg was shorter. Historians like to bring that up first, and how maybe he had the odds against him physically. That sucks on one hand, but it's how you deal with it and how you deal with others that shows what type of person you are, let alone leader. Don Carlos was made hero of the opera by his dad, Philip II of Spain, so right off the hop, easy promotion. All about who you know. Don Carlos would hurt people a lot. He would hurt animals for fun as well. As a true crime enthusiast, you know that's a red flag. According to historians, Don Carlos once made a cobbler eat a pair of boots because he didn't like how they looked. He made somebody eat a pair of boots. We're not going to feel bad for Don Carlos on Bumblebee today. No sir, he was set up to marry Elizabeth of Valios, the eldest daughter of King Henry II, but after a few hours with the man, she decided there's absolutely no way in hell, so she married his father instead, King Philip, in 1560. In 1564, a few brides were lined up for Don Carlos: Mary Queen of Scots, Margaret of Valios, and Anne of Austria. When Carlos was plotting to take out his own father, he was caught and imprisoned in solitary confinement until his death 6 months later. In our number 2 spot today, we have the personal sheet changer. I can't tell if this is the worst job to have or the best. Here we go. Royals have been sweating constantly about people trying to take them out. Taylor's mentioned Boy Jones on here a few times. That guy that stalked the queen. It's terrifying. People are terrifying. Boy Jones would go through the queen's drawers. Big ew. So historically, the royal family would try their best to anticipate an attack, be as safe as you can be, like the kissing sheets for example. Have you ever heard about this royal position? A great deal of monarchs hired taste testers to make sure nobody poisoned them, and they also had a guy get tucked in the king's sheets. I would much rather have the latter. King Henry VIII hired somebody to make sure his bed wasn't poisoned, so you were required to make the king's bed every morning, but you also had to rub all the sheets down before bedtime. You'd have to kiss the bed sheets to make sure that they weren't poisoned. Sleep tight, all safe here. Don't mind the bad breath on all of your pillows. You're safe though. Alright, time to clock out for the day. Clothes as well, that was touched. Maybe not kissed, but for sure touched. Guys wearing my clothes in my bed, no way I'd rather get poisoned. Take my jeans off. In our number 1 spot today, we have King Louis XIV. We gotta talk about perhaps one of the worst sights to see in the royal household. Back in the olden days, enemas were the talk of the town. Rather, the palace. Like most things in the 1400s, only the rich could afford the enema supplies, specifically King Louis XIV. Guy loved enemas. It is believed that over the course of his life, Louis XIV received thousands of enemas. In just 1 year, Louis received 212 enemas. He would always take it a step further, and dare I say a step fancier, by using almond milk. Imagine being married to a guy and he pulls out the almond milk. Like, not again Louis, come on, I just ate, man. No.
Number 10. Dracula. The man, the myth, the legend, Vlad the Impaler. This dude was so down bad, he was the inspiration for Dracula. There's really only one reason why he was so evil, and honestly, it's in his name. Vlad the Impaler liked to impale people, oftentimes alive. As if this was the worst thing thought up by a human being ever, he would leave the pikes on display, creating a horror only the eyes of medieval Europe could see. There's gonna be a lot of bad dudes on this list, some really saucy villains, unsavory characters who will make your skin crawl, but only Vlad has been bad enough to get a monster inspired by him, essentially turning his actions into somewhat of a spooky mythology. Dude gives off some serious goth energy. There's a few portraits of him, but if you look at it, he's got this stare in his eyes, like he wants to impale me or something. Vlad be nimble, Vlad be quick, just wait till you see his sharpened sticks. Number 9. The guy everyone knows. Look, YouTube won't let me say his name, but do we really have to? I mean, it's Mustache Man. Infamous for his bad art and lame book, he was the fascist leader of Germany. The very same leader who forced the world into World War II. Remember that one? Yeah. He's the very same monster who organized the destruction of Jewish peoples in Europe, and if he had his way, probably the whole world. I wouldn't be surprised if you showed a picture of him to anyone on Earth, any country, rich or poor, and they will most likely know who that was. That's the kind of evil that will get you talked about in classes all over the world, and likely for a long time. Eventually, he got what was coming to him, and the world had peace and prosperity, and there was never ever another bad stinky war ever again. Why is he not number one, you might be asking? Well, that's just because his numbers don't compare to others, which is a very troubling statistic. I'll get to that later. Number 8. Busy man. Most people on this list are not going to need any introduction. Genghis Khan is no exception to that. The Mongol warrior king saw his nomadic empire stretch thousands of miles, being one of history's largest empires. If you've been paying attention in history class, and you should have been, don't skip class or Big Ched will put you in the naughty corner. Bad. Yes, that's right, I just referred to myself in the third person. Speaking of third person, that's how many people Genghis unalived in his bloody conquests. Oh, did I say 3? I actually meant a lot. Did I say a lot? I actually meant a disturbing amount. Some people like to point out that he was accepting of other people's cultures and beliefs. Yes, that is true, but that's after he burned down the village right before he got to yours, and you got forcibly assimilated into his numbers. As you can also imagine, a bloodthirsty barbarian like him did not treat women with much respect. It's Genghis Khan, man. That's just how it do be. Number 7. So long, Bowser. Ivan the Terrible. Okay, sure, Vlad was called the Impaler, but you can kind of take that in a different way, right? Not in that way. All innuendos aside, with a name like Ivan the Terrible, it's kind of hard to work around that. Even as a child, Ivan was showing traits of an evil dictator, or supervillain really, as it's said that he would throw animals off of tall roofs in the same way that Mario throws Bowser off of platforms. Becoming the first Tsar of Russia, and probably its worst, he's responsible for many horrors and crimes, but the most infamous being his responsibility for his own son's demise. After a heated argument regarding his unborn grandson, and in a binding fit of rage, Ivan claimed his son's life. Sure, dads get angry when sons don't help mow the lawns or help take out the trash, but that's going a little far. One minute you're having a fight with your dad, and the next minute you're being carried out by Ghanaian pallbearers. You know, the dancing guys, the memes, the casket, you know? Yeah, it's a joke. Number 6, the Mad Doctor. I love doctors. Shout out to the people working in the medical field right now. I appreciate you. I couldn't even imagine the horror that is medical school though. We all know my track record for reading, and hours upon hours of studying would just be bad for my health. I gotta squeeze more video game time in there, it's just how I work, man. However, one doctor I would not want to cross is Dr. Henry Howard Holmes. He is most likely the inspiration for a lot of horror movies. A serial unaliver. Said to have been performing surgeries on animals at a young age, which, again, doing some freaky deaky stuff to animals as a kid is like the red flag of red flags. It's like the only red flag. If that wasn't enough, he used to steal cadavers from the university he was studying at and doing all kinds of not nice things to them, naughty, bad. Having a clear obsession with medical practices and anatomy probably was helpful in disposing of his victims. And like something from Tales of the Crypt Keeper, that's exactly what he did. He constructed a large house, or building really, with trap doors, secret tunnels, and a lot of rooms. A basement where he could dispose of his victims. He would later then open this house of horrors up as a hotel where unknowing people would come to meet their doom.
Yes, Tales of the Crypt Keeper. Come check in to the Hotel of Doom.
How keeping it in the family literally started a war and an empire downfall. Charles II and his family tree. The 17th century wasn't a great time to be a peasant. Agricultural production dropped, famine destroyed communities, and epidemics swept across Europe. But peasants were still better off than the Spanish Habsburgs in one important way. They weren't literally killing themselves off from intentional family activities. Charles's father, King Philip III, was only 10 years old when his parents arranged his first marriage, which resulted in 8 children. After the death of his first wife, Philip remarried his own niece and had 2 daughters and 2 more sons who died as children. Between 1527 and 1661, the year that this dumpy potato called Charles was born, the Spanish royal families produced 34 children. Nearly 30% of them died before the age of 1, and a full half died before their 10th birthdays. But poor leadership from the Habsburg also contributed to this country's issues and declines. The countries needed a functioning king and governing system, and there was literally zero. The monarchy took on an enormous amount of debt while funding a multitude of war efforts in both Europe and the Americas and struggling with inflation. The king was simply unable to rule his kingdom, which would never again reach the heights of the 16th century. He couldn't speak, he was incapable of walking, his body and functions were all deformed, he couldn't even really be a human being. It was clear that Charles wasn't going to live long and he had no children of his own, so in 1700 Charles issued his last will and testament. In the doctorate, Charles chose Philip, Duke of Anjou, but instead of a smooth succession, Charles's death led to the War of the Spanish Succession that dragged on from 1701 until 1713. Maybe Smooth Criminal was written because the family was full of them, the Jacksons. Oh yeah, you guys, I'm going there. This family is a disaster and I will die on this hill. So let's break it down. Since the early 80s, it's been one thing after another. The plastic surgery gossip, Sister LaToya's claims of what she and Mike went through as kids, allegations that were settled out of court in 1994 that Mike had maybe not done some so great things himself. Who better to marry Elvis's daughter? Joe Jackson, former boxer and failed blues musician, his main skill appeared to be devising innovative ways to make his children's lives miserable. Once you knew what Michael Jackson's childhood and early career had been like, the issue wasn't so much why he was apparently turning out so weird, but how it hadn't happened sooner. Even without their father's aggression, the Jacksons still would have dealt with their weird-ass mama. A devout Jehovah's Witness, she had them pore over the Watchtower illustrations of imminent Armageddon for funsies, and she would wash them with rubbing alcohol, making a family of extreme germaphobes. The Jackson 5, as they were to become, were not allowed to play outside with other children. They rehearsed for 5 hours a day after school, and their enthusiasm was incentivized by the fact that if they got a dance step wrong, their father would order them to break a branch off the tree in the garden for a switch. You guys remember that Community episode? In his 40s, Michael was still telling reporters that the thought of his father made him nauseous. So dramatic it needs its own movie, and it actually has some. K-drama worthy King Suk-jong. This Korean lineage is captured in movies The Fatal Encounter and The Eternal Empire, so if any K-drama fans are watching, maybe jump on those. King Suk-jong was a pretty fickle dude, and he didn't take much to fall out of his favor. His first wife, Queen In-hoyeon, ticked him off, so he banished her. Then he married a side piece, Lady Jang. Her promotion led to a bloody conflict known as the Jizi-Sawa, which resulted in the Sauron faction taking power and her son, Gyeongjong, named Crown Prince. After a bit, the king started liking his next son, Yeojan's mother, Lady Choi. Lady Choi was an open supporter of the previously banished old queen, and the king didn't need much convincing other than that. He demoted Jang, banished her and her brother, and then he brought back the original queen. Meanwhile, Yeojong's older brother, was king. He was sickly and heirless, so just in case, Yeojong was made the royal prince successor to handle the state affairs. Yeojong takes the lead once his brother finally kicked the bucket. During his 52-year reign, Yeojong accomplished a number of important reforms in various fields including political organization, culture, and industry. Born in 1735, his son Prince Sado was bullied by him a lot. He'd publicly humiliate him and abuse him. Sado suffered from delusions and nightmares from the age of 10, and things just got worse as he grew up. His constant quest to impress his father drove him to madness. His reaction to losing his stepmother and grandmother in the same month sent him over the edge. To say he didn't take it well would be a gross understatement. He beat the eunuchs, he killed palace staff, he bagged a nun somehow, tried to seduce his own sister, and assaulted several ladies in waiting. In one instance, he walked into his room holding a recently severed head of an eunuch who he just killed. Then he forced anyone around to look at it, including his own wife. When his father found out what his misdeeds were, he summoned him to the court, locked him in a giant chest of rice, and after 8 days, Sado was dead. Next. Let's look at self-sabotage to the max. Wan Li, the 13th emperor of China's Ming Dynasty, had 2 official concerts and a whole bunch of B-words. That's a fun way to say he had a lot of concubines. His mother was Empress Dowager Li, once an imperial maid who had no political resources to manipulate. She worked her way up to empress, where she developed a romantic relationship with Zhang Zhuzhang, who was an extraordinary prime minister and reformers in ancient China and brought about the last great reign of the Ming Dynasty. dynasty. She trusted him to teach the young Wanli, and when Zhang passed away, he left a great empire with efficient management system, wealthy and stable civilians, peaceful borders, and no threatening enemies. Once, the Wanli emperor slept with a maid and had an heir, but then homeboy fell in love with the imperial concubine named Zhenge. Now, his mama pitied service Wang and forced Wanli to give her the royal title, thus the heir to the throne. Wanli said, nah, I want Zheng's baby, my second son, to be the heir. This controversy lasted for 15 years, countless intense debates were conducted, and over 300 intelligent officials were resigned, demoted, put to death, or exiled. But the emperor's ministers wouldn't stand for his son, Wanli III, as heir, and Wanli was forced to declare his first son by the consort, Lady Wang, as the crown prince. So, he stopped working. For the last 20 years or so of his reign, he was like a modern-day politician. Feet kicked up, head in the clouds. In a passive-aggressive protest, Wanli spent decades ignoring meetings, memorandums, and other royal duties. Unsurprisingly, this undermined the country. Many historians attribute this to the crumbling of the Ming Dynasty in 1644. And last on the list, the tale of two brothers. In 1527, the Inca king Huayna Capac died and decided to just leave his kingdom to his two sons, Atahualpa and Huascar, to duke it out in a serious family meltdown moment. The two men had different mothers, as Inca rulers took multiple wives and concubines, so they tried the dual leader thing, but they just couldn't see eye to eye. They did what any disagreeing adults do. In 1529, a war broke out. Things got personal. Atahualpa apparently at one point drank out of the skull of one of his bro's generals. This Inca civil war would hurry along the downfall of the great civilization and aid in the erasure of its history, because in 1532, Francisco Pizarro's Spanish conquistadors arrived to erase some history and culture, and they appeared right as Atahualpa was declaring victory over his brother who he'd captured. Pizarro invited the Incan ruler to come down to the great square of Cajamarca. Because he didn't know how the whole colonizer thing went down, Atahualpa agreed and brought 80,000 people with an unarmed inner retinue to show goodwill. Meanwhile, the Spanish had armed men hidden everywhere, and a friar from the Spanish side offered the leader a Bible, which he didn't even know how to open or read. When asked to accept Christianity, he didn't, because a stranger was offering him something he couldn't understand. Because he refused, the Spanish jumped out of hiding and attacked the unarmed contingent. Atahualpa was captured and eventually executed, though not before he was able to get out an important order to his people during his capture. Don't forget to execute my brother.
Kicking off the list at number 10, smoky behind. When somebody tells you that you're just blowing smoke, it means that you're lying, okay? You've now been given exaggerated information of sorts. Well, back in the 18th century, they literally had to blow tobacco smoke at your behind. Yeah, weirdest work break ever, I'd say. So why did we perform magician enemas back in the day? What was the deal here? Well, tobacco smoke enemas were used to treat quite a few symptoms, or they thought so, including a common cold. These enemas came in these fancy kits with a fancy rubber tube. It was all fancy because it was an honest medical practice at the time. It was done by legit medical practitioners. This is the funniest part. The idea was that the tobacco smoke could warm up a soon-to-be deceased body. The nicotine would stimulate your adrenal glands, jolting you back into good health. The best health, might we say. And the way they would do it in the mid-1800s was by just blowing smoke and just waiting, seeing what happened. We're figuratively and literally blowing smoke. That's the origin of that saying. Fun fact there. Imagine doing that today. Like, I think I dislocated my shoulder. What do I do? He's like, one sec. Number 9, alarm clocks. While the medical world was one threat in Victorian times, apparently so was the technological side. Who knew? We obviously didn't have reliable alarm clocks back in the 1800s, obviously, but we did have jobs. So in order to get up on time, lamplighters or knockers would come by and tip you off. Yeah, they would just yell in your window and just alarm. That's how you'd wake up. A man would yell into your window and smack you with a stick. Legend has it, a young man named Sam Wardell, he got a little creative with his wake-up calls. He needed more than a lamplighter at 5 a.m., so he would Tony Stark this alarm clock gadget. He would use wires, a bunch of stones, all that unsafe stuff. Then at a certain time, stones would fall to the ground, of course waking him up, and presumably everyone else in the building. That would be alarming. Well, Christmas Eve 1885, tragedy unfolded. A few friends had come over for a holiday visit, so Sam had to move some furniture around, rightfully so, to make room for, windmills and breakdancing, whatever they did in Victorian Christmas times. The next morning, he forgot to put things back in the small apartment, and the obvious happened. The rocks then fell on him while he was asleep. Yeah, that probably doesn't feel too good. I thought iPhone alarms were jarring. I take back everything I've ever said. Number 8, relaxative. Okay, so right off the bat, the Victorian era was a little messy. I'm sure you've gathered this by now here on Bumblebee. But these messy new illnesses were putting lots of pressure on medical practitioners, so they were desperate for these new treatments. We laugh at Victorian medical treatments, but they tried, okay? They at least tried. They also achieved many medical breakthroughs as well. But when it comes to handling chickenpox in the Victorian era, well, that wasn't one of them. That was not our finest hour. Chickenpox in the Victorian era was being treated by using laxatives. Yeah, let that sink in for a moment. I have chickenpox. What should I do? Well, try some laxatives. Yeah, folks would slam some castor oil and then, ready for this? They would get even more sick. Who would have thought? You thought you were uncomfortable before, castor oil. Yeah, chug that, and then now you're even weaker. Now you're dead. Number 7, backed up. Let's say it's the Victorian era and let's say you're constipated, right? It happens, you know? Well, bad ideas will most likely follow, if you didn't already guess that. According to Merck's 1899 medical manual, small amounts of strychnine were prescribed to those who were constipated. Yeah, the strychnos nux vomica was thought to better the gastric functions. Even a small amount of this stuff would attack your respiratory system. You'd contract, you convulse, it's horrible. It'd be a painful way to go out. It's much, much worse than being constipated. Any day. I would much rather be constipated than any type of strychnine. Are you kidding me? Number 6, leeches. I grew up with hearing problems. I've been around the block with earaches, ear infections. I had ear tubes numerous times, all that jazz. So I feel really bad for the folks in this next one, okay? I hear you. Pun intended. In the Victorian era, medical practitioners would say to use leeches for your ear infections. That's the number one trick they don't want you to know. There it is. Once they're attached to you, the idea was that they can numb pain while at the same time providing proteins and peptides to its host. So on paper, again, the idea made sense, but the science didn't quite follow, did it? It wasn't entirely hopeless though. Recently in 2004, the FDA reintroduced leeches to the medical world, yeah, because their bite can break up blood clots and induce blood flow. So it's not entirely hopeless. We talked about leech collectors on this channel before, so of course we have to talk about more of the science that they were hoping to achieve with it, right? Also, I worked at a retirement home when I was 16. I thought that job sucked. Imagine being a leech collector? No way. Number 5, George V. We love hobbies here on Bumblebee. I mean, I used to collect special quarters growing up. I swear to God. The only time I've ever been good at saving money was when I was 12. I would see one of these and be like, don't touch it. George V turned out he loved stamps. A lot. Like a lot. Since he was a wee young lad, he was collecting these little guys. Here's the unusually impressive part about him though and his hobby. He continued to collect stamps during World War I. This guy was busy. Everybody's trying to stay alive and George is just licking stamps in the library like a prince. Like all collections, it started at an early age and now it's at the point where it's past impressive and it's just borderline strange. This guy had albums on albums of stamps. He had around 330 albums, each with 60 pages full of stamps. Quick maths, that's like 20,000 pages full of stamps. So naturally he was nicknamed the King of Stamps, or rather the King of Philately, the official term for collecting stamps. It's a nice word. Philately. Philately. Back in 1905, he set an all-time stamp record, which I didn't even know that was the thing, and it was the most money ever spent on a single stamp. The guy dropped like 220,000 US on a single stamp. Somebody even asked the prince down the road if he had heard about this idiot who spent 1,400 pounds on a stamp, and he was proud of it. He was like, that was me. You want to see it? The next King George is a little different, to say the least.
At number 4, womanizer. I'm going to preface this by saying that George IV of England was voted as England's worst king by historians, so that should already tell you a lot about this guy. Georgie here was yet another one of those monarchs who was a little too invested in his intimate conquests, you know? Now we do know that the encounters that he was on were all consensual, so that's a plus. However, he was still creepy about it. Yeah. This man tried everything to get a woman to sleep with him. He would throw a tantrum if she said no, or threaten to end his life if he didn't get to do the 8-legged nature dance, you know? Somehow, this had a pretty good success rate, even though he was not a catch at all. It feels like this was one of those situations where you kind of just give in to make him stop talking, you know? Anyways, this guy was super creepy because on top of the lengths that he would go to just to get some time in the sack, he also kept trophies of his conquests. He would ask each of the people he slept with for a lock of their hair and he kept them all. Back then it was kind of common for lovers to keep locks of each other's hair, but George's collection was alarming because of just how many locks of hair there were. After the king died, his brothers found 7,000 envelopes, each with a lock of hair that was, quote, enough to stuff a sofa, end quote. Fun fact, if you want to see this insane collection, it is in a museum in Scotland, so check that out if you want, I guess.
Number 3. Kleptomania Part 2. On our spoiled queens list, Brie mentioned Queen Mary and how she just couldn't stop stealing, which is hilarious to me, just this old lady stealing your shit. Well, the last king of Egypt also had sticky fingers. He was even better at it too. Check this out. Farouk I was the youngest son of Egypt's first king, Fuad I. Now born in 1920 in Alexandria, and in his early days at school, he couldn't concentrate. The king sent him to England even after to hopefully find a better way of teaching, something that works for him, but still it was to no avail. Once the king passed away in 1936, Farouk then got the throne, but also so much property and so much money. He had hundreds of fancy cars, 75,000 acres of land. This guy had it all. Literally, he had anything he could think of, but still he felt like he needed to take more, to steal. At 17 years old, he would slam 12 eggs for breakfast and then wash it down with 30 bottles of beer. Nutritious and delicious. Horrible. On top of the fact that he loved to steal, he was the biggest hoarder. So he had thousands of shirts, randomly. He also had 50 diamond-studded walking sticks for some reason, and like a prince such as myself, he too collected coins. I mean, his collection was much nicer, but still, great minds think alike. Spoiled minds think alike, rather. Oh shit, this is eye-opening. One of the most bizarre facts about Farouk was he pickpocketed Winston Churchill once. He took the guy's watch. After everything I just said, he still decided to steal his watch. What a gem. We love him. Yeah.
At number 2, the King of Pettiness. Let's talk about a ruler that the Indian state of Alwar has described as controversial. If his own people are calling him controversial, then you know something's up, and boy, you better strap in because you're in for a wild ride with this one. Maharaja Jai Singh was pretty eccentric in a pretty dark way. He was known to have a temper and act on impulse, and he did some very questionable and downright scary things. He was known to be very competitive and hated to lose. One time, while playing polo, he and his team lost, and so in retaliation, he blamed the horse he was using and made the horse get extra crispy. He fired his horse. I'm sure you know where I'm going with that. If not, use your noodle, I don't know. Unfortunately, the cruelty towards living things didn't stop at animals, and he was also known to kidnap women from the streets and go all criminal minds on them. On a slightly lighter note, though, the Maharaja was also known to be very petty. Once he went into a Rolls-Royce dealership, and the person working there thought that he was broke and ignored him. Thinking that this was insanely rude, he bought 7 Rolls-Royces, sent them back to India, and used them to pick up garbage. This guy was really just doing the absolute most.
And coming in at our number 1 spot, King Ludwig II. Home renovation shows rock my world. I can watch Love It or List It for months at a time. It's the dream, building your own home one day, and if you're a king, well, it's pretty easy to get that done. In our Spoiled Queens Part 2, I mentioned a princess that had a house made of ice, literal ice. Well, King Ludwig II had numerous castles built to resemble fairy tales. Literally, like fairy tales. I gotta admit, I kind of love this a lot. Ludwig was only 18 when he became the King of Bavaria in 1864, and then he had castles, like castles, more than one, built after he was inspired from romantic literature and spending some time at the opera. The kid was a dreamer, you gotta love it. He would spend his nights in one castle looking through a telescope at his new castle being built, so he would just watch it all night. That's like the king's way of waiting for your Amazon delivery. Just standing there, just like, it's coming. 17 years and it's done. Just 4 years in, he designed his own castle, and to this day, it's one of the most photographed places in the world. Neuschwanstein Castle. Go check it out. It's literally a paradise.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have the Morgan family. The Morgan dynasty refers to a wealthy and influential American family that made its fortune in the banking industry. The family's patriarch, Junius Spencer Morgan, was born in 1813 and began his career as a banker in Boston. He later moved to London, where he worked for the banking firm George Peabody & Co. and established his own firm, J.S. Morgan & Co. Junius Spencer Morgan's son, John Pierpont Morgan, also known as J.P. Morgan, became one of the most powerful financiers of all time. It is said that during the bank crisis in 1893, J.P. Morgan borrowed 100 tons of gold to the U.S. authorities, which is how he and his family would later go on to control the gold in the USA. He expanded the family's banking empire and played a major role in financing many of the largest industrial and infrastructure projects of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, including the creation of U.S. Steel, General Electric, and International international harvester. There are some pretty dark beliefs that some have about this family that ties to their involvement in both world wars, as well as the fact that members of the family played significant roles in the founding of the Federal Reserve System and the International Monetary Fund. The family's wealth and influence has allowed them to maintain close ties to the political and the social elite. Today, the Morgans still own the biggest family reserve of gold, and rumor has it that it is connected by a tunnel with the New York branch of the US Central Bank. In our number 9 spot today, we have the DuPont family. The DuPont family is a prominent family of French descent that has played a very significant role in the development of the United States since the late 18th century. The family has been involved in a variety of industries, including chemicals, gunpowder, textiles, and agriculture. The DuPont family's story began with, the first DuPont, who was a French chemist who immigrated to the United States in 1800. He would later go on to found a chemical company that specialized in the production of gunpowder. The company's success helped to establish the DuPont family as one of the wealthiest and most powerful in the United States. These roots only grew deeper as the family allegedly ensured the US purchase of Louisiana from Napoleon in 1803. During World War II, the family's chemical company played a very significant role in the Manhattan Project, which developed the very first atomic bomb. The family has also been involved in politics, with several members serving as governors, senators, and other elected officials. Some even believe that this family had the ability to influence US authorities so much that they might be responsible for the initial ban of the production of hemp and the ban on the devil's lettuce in order to protect the production of nylon, which was one of the most important products for the DuPont company. Today, the company is one of the biggest producers of GMO seeds, and they also have founded the Doomsday Treasury, where samples of all plants are held and preserved in the case of an apocalypse. In our number 8 spot today, we have the Rothschild family. The Rothschild dynasty is a very wealthy and influential family that gained prominence in the late 18th and early 19th centuries through their banking and financial activities. The family originated in Frankfurt, Germany, and its founder, Mayer Amschel Rothschild, began his banking career in the 1760s. Apparently, he sent 5 of his sons to financial centers so that the family could be involved in all of the most important places for world finances. The Rothschilds quickly became one of the most powerful banking families in Europe, with branches in major cities such as Paris, Vienna, and London. They financed governments, monarchs, and other wealthy individuals and played a very significant role in the economic and political affairs of many European countries. One of the most notable achievements of the family was their role in financing the British war effort against Napoleon Bonaparte in the early 19th century. The family used their vast network of agents and couriers to get information about the outcome of battles before anyone else, which allowed them to make informed decisions about investments. The Rothschilds also played a key role in the development of the modern banking system, including the establishment of the Bank of England and the introduction of the concept of a central bank. Today, the family remains one of the wealthiest and most influential in the world, with a net worth estimated at several billions of dollars, with some estimating that they manage trillions of dollars worth of money. Some even claim that the Rothschild family controls the world through the US Central Bank Federal Reserve. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Windsor family. The Windsor family is of course the current reigning royal family of the United Kingdom. The dynasty was established in 1970 when King George V changed the family name from Saxe-Coburg and Gotha to Windsor. The House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, which itself was a branch of the House of Wettin, was a prominent German dynasty. Queen Victoria married her first cousin, Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, and their descendants went on to become the rulers of several European countries. Many of us are of course privy to the many royal scandals there have been over the years for the Windsors, whether that has to do with the current king and his late wife, the very unsettling Prince Andrew, or some of the ongoing situations with Harry and Meghan. The former monarch, Her Royal Highness Queen Elizabeth II, ascended the throne in 1952 following the death of her father, King George VI. She was the longest reigning monarch in British history and oversaw very significant changes to the role and responsibilities of the British monarchy during her reign. Of course, as a monarch, this family retains quite a bit of power, a whole pile of wealth, and they are still heavily influential. In our number 6 spot today, we have the Walton family. The Walton family is one of the wealthiest families in the world and is best known for founding and owning the retail giant Walmart. This family is headed by siblings Jim, Alice, and Rob Walton, who inherited their fortune from their father, Sam Walton, who initially founded Walmart in 1969. 1962. Sam Walton began his career in retail with a single store in Arkansas, and over the years, he and his family grew Walmart into the largest retailer in the entire world, with thousands of stores in the United States and all around the world. Today, Walmart is a Fortune 500 company and one of the largest employers in the world, with over 2 million employees. The Walton family's net worth is estimated to be around $230 billion, making them one of the wealthiest families in the world. In addition to their stake in Walmart, the family also has investments in other businesses and ventures, and throughout the years it's been, the company receives both praise for their practices, but more often than not are met with criticism for much of the questionable and shady dealings.
At number 5, sucking toes. The British royal family are considered celebrities. I mean, with the amount of time people spend obsessing about their every move, I'd say that they're 10 times more famous than the Kardashians. They don't need their own reality show for people to keep up with them. People just do it. With this obsession with the royals obviously comes paparazzi trying to get the latest scoop on members of the family and what they do in their spare time, as well as who they're canoodling with. This was how Sarah Ferguson was exposed for seeing other men shortly after she and Prince Andrew separated. Sarah was photographed topless on a beach with a man named John Bryan, and it could have just been a juicy story by itself, but things got weird when pictures were published showing the man sucking on Sarah's toes. This again wasn't a good look for the royals, and the queen was pretty mad about the whole situation, but I'd like to look at the bright side of this. Think that this John Bryan guy had a pretty good time throughout all this. I mean, he got to suck royal toes and be published in the newspaper. Sounds like a pretty lit time for him.
Number 4, party time. British royals are people of high esteem, morals, and cut from a higher quality of cloth. So when members of the royal family are seen partying too hard, well, it's a bad look. Prince George, Duke of Kent, was one such royal. He became known for spending his evenings in the best hotels and ballrooms that money could buy, even sometimes wandering into venues that were a tad tawdry even by today's standards. What's more interesting than that is the prince living the life of a frat boy is that his promiscuous relationship with not only just women, but men as well. Add in substance abuse issues that would make Charlie Sheen blush, and you've got yourself one wild prince. Yet again, there's some private letters that seem to support such wild accusations. Unfortunately, he passed away in a plane crash that is shrouded in mystery, and the royal family is suspected of having a hand. Foreshadowing much?
At number 3, the milkman's son. By far the most scandalous royal relationship of modern times was without a doubt Prince Charles and Princess Diana's marriage. We all know how messy their relationship was with the love triangle, the affairs, and Diana's confessions of how tough it was to be married to Charles. But one of the other pretty juicy secret scandals that surrounded the couple was the speculation that the couple's youngest son, Prince Harry, wasn't even Prince Charles's biological kid. In a tell-all interview with Princess Diana in 1995, she admitted to having had a 5-year-long affair with a military man named James Hewitt. After Diana's passing, people started speculating that perhaps this James character was actually Harry's biological dad. I mean, when you take a side-by-side look at James and Harry, their resemblance is pretty uncanny. James denied all allegations, and the royal family did the same, but this still remains one of those royal secrets that I'm sure everyone believes but just won't admit.
Number 2, stepbro? Yeah, I know it's gross, but the truth of the matter is none of us would be here if it wasn't for a little inbreeding. Royals just tend to turn that dial up to 11. Back in ye olde times, bloodlines had to be maintained, and the only way to keep them pure was to marry cousins and have children. Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip are both related to Queen Victoria, but the crazy bus doesn't stop here. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert were first cousins, and they had 9 children together. This is a tradition that all royal families practice. Of course, marriage back then was more of a business decision or a political one. It's why certain distant cousins end up ruling different monarchies and empires. Sure, I get it. Why cross the street when you can cross the hall? But at some point, you gotta run out of cousins. Let's just be glad this practice is of the past and stays in the past.
At number 1, long lost family. The royal family is known for trying to make themselves look perfect in the eyes of the public. They are always trying to look poised and put together and without flaws, but this effort also comes with its dark side, and there's a dark royal secret that just shows the lengths that they have gone to make people think that they are all just perfect people of society. It turns out that the queen had secret cousins that very few people knew about. The royal family and everyone adjacent are very well-known people, so how did we not know know about the Queen's cousins? Well, that's because they were essentially shunned and shipped off elsewhere because of their mental states. Back in the 1940s, mental disabilities were not very understood and were often seen as embarrassing for the families of the people who had whatever disability. The royal family thought that these cousins, Nerissa and Catherine, were too embarrassing for the royal family to keep around, so they had them incarcerated in a mental institution and they remained there for the rest of their lives, cut off from the rest of the royal family. It is said that no members of the family ever came to visit them. Now that is not a way to treat family. At number 10, royal enemas. Apparently, back in the day, enemas were all the rage amongst the elite. It was believed that enemas were good for your health, so everyone was doing it to try and live a little longer than the rest of those commoners and peasants. One person who really just couldn't get enough enemas in his life was King Louis XIV. It is believed that over the course of his life, Louis XIV received thousands of enemas. When I tell you this guy was obsessed, I'm not kidding. One year, Louis received 212 enemas in just the 1 year. And of course, he had to make his enemas a little jazzy and couldn't just use water like any other person. Oh no. My guy was using things like almond milk. His enemas were also sometimes scented with orange or rose and sometimes even colored just to make it a little more special. To get an idea of just how obsessed the elite were with receiving enemas, just think about the fact that a French duchess once received one during a court ball. The duchess was in the middle of having a conversation with Louis XIV, and during this conversation, one of her maids came over, snuck under her dress, and gave the duchess an enema on the spot. Ew. These people were so weird. At number 9, pampered pony. I'm sure I can speak for most people when I say when you have a pet, you love and care for that thing like it is your child, right? Well, one Roman emperor might have taken that concept a little bit too far, because saying that he was obsessed with his horse is an understatement. The Roman emperor known as Caligula had a horse named Incitatus. Caligula was a horse racing enthusiast, so Incitatus was his pride and joy, and not too many people were all that thrilled about it, to be honest. When I tell you this horse was treated better than most people have ever been, I'm not kidding. The horse's stall was made out of marble, his manger was made out of ivory, and he was even fed oats flaked with gold. Caligula was also very adamant about his horse receiving a good and restful sleep before a race, and he was so serious about it that he made guards stand outside of the horse's stable to make sure that the horse remained undisturbed while it slept. This horse even had its own furniture. Like, what is he gonna do with it? He's a horse. Caligula was so fond of his horse that he even made it a priest and promised to make him consul, which was the lead position in the Roman government after the emperor, highly coveted by senators. This was the last straw for people because the emperor was putting his horse above his own people, so he was assassinated. Now, before I carry on telling you guys about the wild and crazy things that kings did back in the day, I would like to first ask you guys to consider leaving a like on this video if you're enjoying it so far, and also maybe think about subscribing as well to see more videos like this one. At number 8, Mumia medicine. It's safe to say that medicine from the past is very different from modern times. These days we have pharmaceuticals to treat illnesses, but back in the days of old there were very different and quite questionable methods of treating ailments, and one of those methods included cannibalism. In the 16th and 17th centuries, it was common practice for elites like priests, kings, and other nobles to consume remedies that included human bones, blood, and fat as medicine to treat ailments from headaches to epilepsy, and this practice was called mumia medicine. At first, it started with people using Egyptian mummies and skulls from Irish graves for use in medicine, as bones would be ground and used in different tinctures for various uses. But soon, other parts of the body started to be used. Human fat was later used to treat ailments on the outside of the body, and blood would be consumed as well, as it was believed to contain the vitality of life. Several monarchs were known to use mumia medicine, like Charles II and William II of England, Francois I of France, and Christian IV of Denmark. At number 7, kissing sheets. For thousands of years, monarchs worried about the threat of being poisoned by their enemies, and so they thought of an array of precautions to take in order to prevent being taken out by some kind of spicy death sauce or something. Many monarchs hired tasters to try their food before it was given to the king to make sure that it wasn't poisoned, but some monarchs were also afraid of being poisoned through something that they touched. This is why Henry VIII hired someone with a very important job to make sure that his bed wasn't poisoned. The person who was tasked with making the king's bed was also required to kiss every part of his bed in the morning. They would kiss the pillows, sheets, and blankets to prove that someone hadn't smeared poison on it. The king was also concerned with people poisoning clothing too, so his clothes as well as his son's clothes were also tested for poison before getting dressed. At number 6, eternal youth. I know that there are a lot of people out there who want to live forever. I am one of those people. I am afraid of dying, but I also want to see what humanity will look like many years from now until the sun consumes the earth. Unfortunately, that's kind of impossible, at least for now, until we come up with some kind of way to make people live longer. But this idea of prolonging your life has been around for thousands of years, and one Chinese emperor was super obsessed with the idea and really tried his best to live for at least another 10,000 years. Emperor Ying Zhang was obsessed with finding a magic elixir that would make him live longer, and he demanded that his subjects find this immortality elixir for him. Now, even though he brought a lot of prosperity to people during his rule, he never let go of his demand for immortality, and it put a lot of pressure on his underlings to find him something to help him live forever, but obviously that didn't happen. He was so concerned with his lifespan that he even brought magicians into his court. His obsession alienated him from his people, and after all of that effort trying to live longer, he died at the age of 49.
Number 5. Nothing left. Alexander the Great was an excellent warrior for his time. Having conquered so much at a young age is really quite impressive. His empire stretched from Greece all the way to India. For a history class or a good book, this is fine, but in reality, he was a conqueror. The places he was marching into weren't exactly happy to have spear-wielding visitors. He laid siege on multiple cities, executed those who defied him, and sold people into YouTube's least favorite S-word. Just about checks off everything a guy needs to be considered a tyrant. History remembers his conquest, but I for sure will not forget how brutal conquerors can really be. Number 4. Chop chop. While Maximilien Robespierre was not a king in the monarch sense, he did hold a lot of political power in France when the political climate was quite messy. Plus, France was at war. But even messier than that is the way he dealt with citizens who were deemed anti-revolution, by sending them to the guillotine. Within a 1-year period, he sent 17,000 people to their dooms via the National Razor, or as it became to be known. He even began practicing deism, something he called the cult of the supreme being. And if you know your history, you know that you can't get away with that forever. And with some sweet poetic justice, Robespierre was sentenced to the guillotine. Number 3. All my friends are dead. Usually when people expire, the human thing to do is bury said lifeless human. It's just what we do. But apparently Ferdinand I of Naples did not get that memo, instead taking a page from Night at the Museum. No, this is not a cute comedy movie starring Ben Stiller, but in reality a complete horrifying nightmare. Ferdinand took the saying, "keep your enemies close," a little too literally, as his favorite form of punishment was to mummify his enemies, which, let's face it, if he's a king, there's gonna be plenty. And he would like to display these mummies in what's probably the coolest place to be if you're into that weird goth stuff. He did keep some alive in the dungeon, but he much preferred his guests embalmed, where he would have them dressed up on display, just as they were before making the mistake of crossing Ferdinand. Now, what's the point of having that hardcore collection if you're not going to show it off? Well, he did. To the people he suspected of treason, which in a place like that, treason leaves your mind pretty quick. Number 2. Average height for the time. Napoleon Bonaparte was one of the greatest military strategists of his time, maybe of all time. With full support of the French army, Napoleon found himself earning gallant victories one after another, all being accomplished at a very young age. However, after years of great success in multiple wars and kicking a lot of imperial butt, it started to go to his head. Shortly after the coup that overthrew Robespierre, Napoleon had gained enough support to claim himself as the Emperor of France. With said power, dissolved the freedom of press, reduced the rights of women, and oh yeah, he was at war with most of Europe for years to come. While his military victories cannot be understated, his rise as a tyrannical dictator makes him very unholy. Number 1. Dracula. There's been a lot of unholy things said here today, but old Vladdy takes the cake. What he lacked in land and power, he made up for in his brutality. As the legends go, Vlad was creative in his punishments, and was well noted for his human art pieces. And by art, I mean impaling his enemy on pikes. sometimes through their rear ends, and leaving them as warnings for anyone who dared cross him. Similar to the time visiting envoys wouldn't remove their hats as it is to do in tradition, so Vlad had their hats nailed to their skulls, so that they may never remove them. There are a few other stories that are just too hot for YouTube, but I think he's a textbook example of unholy. He may also be the inspiration for Dracula. Imagine being that much of a monster one has created in your likeness. I mean, just looking at the painting of this guy creeps me out, man. Whoa.
For example, Tennessee Williams, who became famous for airing his family's dirty laundry on Broadway, being derided by critics and blacklisted by the Roman Catholic cardinals, who condemned his scripts as revolting, deplorable, morally repellent, and offensive to Christian standards of decency. And if he didn't have the terrifying family life that he did, he wouldn't have changed and challenged the course of Broadway. His mother's continual search for the perfect nuclear family life, his sister's debilitating schizophrenia, as well as his father's heavy drinking, abusive, and sometimes criminal nature, caused them to move around numerous times around in the St. Louis areas, locations that he would later use as inspiration for his work. And like the famous characters Blanche and Stanley from A Streetcar Named Desire, he was troubled and self-destructive, an abuser of substances like his father, and trying not to take his own life was a long-term struggle due to the trauma he'd experienced. The character of Blanche is believed to be based off of his own sister Rose, who was diagnosed with schizophrenia alongside a few other mental disorders when she was in her early 20s. Williams witnessed how her illness weighed her, but also never forgave his parents for forcing a prefrontal lobotomy on her, now largely discredited as a medical treatment, and it incapacitated Rose for the rest of her life. Anguish over his sister's fate and his traumas took its toll on Williams' health. He battled depression for most of his life, and in 1969 he was hospitalized by his brother. After his release from the hospital in the 1970s, Williams wrote a few other plays, a memoir, poem, short stories, and a novel. In 1975 he published Memoirs, which detailed his life and discussed his addiction as well as his homosexuality. It'd only be a few years later before he's found alone in a hotel room. You've heard about these guys on our channel before, the Boleyns, aka history's Nepo babies. See, starting with Daddy Thomas Boleyn, this noble spent his career sucking up to King Henry in order to wedge his kids all up in there. An insane decision as a parent, seeing as King Henry was known for chopping heads off of ladies. First, Mary is tossed his way, but like Seinfeld in that Roommates episode, Henry wants the other one, Anne Boleyn. As Henry's obsession with Anne grew, so did Thomas's standing in court, and some have speculated that he pressured his daughter to insist on wedding the king, who was already married at the time. Henry says, "Don't worry about that, baby, I got this," and literally subverts and rewrites a religion to divorce his initial wife Catherine and marry Mistress Anne, effectively establishing a new church of which he became the head and changing the course of history. 3 years after the controversial marriage in 1535, Anne, having failed to produce a male heir, was also accused of adultery with not one but 5 men, one of them being her own brother. Oh, and also plotting the king's assassination, and she fell out of favor. So her head got to fall off her body, classic history style. Anne's brother George had already been executed for his alleged involvement with Anne's treasonable plot, and her sister Mary long since banished for having married for love. Their father Thomas lost his position as Lord Privy Seal and died a few short years later. And everyone knows the cons. You have to expect them in this list, honestly, even if you've heard about them 1,000 times. These guys manage to take the cake in so many categories of terrible that they just tend to circulate discussions regarding history. So, there is Genghis Khan, founder of the vast Mongol Empire, who was a visionary warrior and leader, rising to power after successfully uniting all nomad tribes of Northeast Asia to dominate the green steppes of Mongolia. In 1206, juices flowing and feeling good about the invasion expansion stuff so far, he proclaimed the Mongol Empire and called himself Genghis Khan, the universal ruler, and moved to attack China and literally anywhere else he could find, expanding his empire to 12 million square miles of territory. Genghis and his sons also waged major wars on 2 fronts simultaneously and conquered Russia in winter, both feats that eluded the also short and angry men Napoleon and Adolf. Before he died, Genghis Khan ordered his sons to split the empire in multiple khanates that would continue to push the boundaries of the empire. At the peak of its glory with his sons, it occupied most of Eurasia, spreading from Austria to Korea and from South Siberia to the Himalayas. The Great Khan's descendants conquered nearly everything of interest, turning the Mongol Empire into the largest territory in history. Genghis Khan's grandson, Kublai Khan, founded the Yuan dynasty in 1271, which then later ruled China until 1368. Stories like this one are the reason there's so many period dramas set in England. it is royal sibling rivalry. Before Meghan and Harry and all of their stuff, there were other scandals. But some forget about the brothers, George III and Edward, the Duke of Windsor. So, in the 1920s, George is married and a career naval officer, while his brother Edward, why, he's Prince of Wales, salacious fiend, and international sex symbol. The bleep hit the fan when the buzzkill George learns his brother Edward is shaking it up with Wallace Simpson, who is divorced twice. He snitches to Daddy, who makes a comment about, when I'm dead, the boy will ruin himself in 12 months. Anyways, so he manifests that and he dies, and Edward is the oldest, so he's tossed on the throne hot plate. He says, okay, but can my girlfriend come? Seeing as being king literally means he's the head of the Anglican Church, which has a no-no grounds on divorce, he was forbidden that. So by 1936, Edward is miserable. He misses his boo and the fun life, and only about 325 days into his reign, he abdicates to George. Immediately after abdication, he becomes a gold digger divorcee. Wallis was never granted her HRH title, so Edward decided to spam call his little brother, asking for that and money, even though he had a loaded bank account. Meanwhile, George is busy trying to become a new king during the start of the Second World War. So, since they also felt so snubbed by British royalty, Wallis and Edward decided to party with the Yahtzees during the start of World War II. That's a bad time if there were ever not one. At one point, Edward straight up hangs out with Adolf, so in 1940, as fears in England grew of Edward's apparent bestie ties with the enemy, he was offered governorship of the far-off Bahamas. The Duke begrudgingly accepted, he was forced, and was shipped off, and not allowed to return for a very long time. What's crazy is even as his brother was dying, Edward pestered him while he was on his deathbed to give Wallis the HRH title and money still. Get ready for a whole lot of Ivans. It's Ivan the Terrible and the Terrible family. Just kidding, their last name isn't Terrible. Or is it? I'm a history host, I should know. Anyways, I think what made this family terrifying was being part of it, because Ivan, the first Tsar of Russia, had a complex personality that contributed to his famous behavior and his nickname. Intelligent, yet prone to outbreaks of uncontrollable rage from a young age, he faced constant threats from usurpers to his throne after the deaths of both of his parents on his 8th birthday. After his wife's death, Ivan sank into a depression that inspired a 24-year-long reign of terror. After he seized absolute control, Ivan slayed any noble who spoke against him. He allegedly even blinded the architect of the St. Basilia Cathedral so that he could never create another building as beautiful, which is dramatic, sure, but it's also hell of a compliment to your work. His 9 children suffered through years of abuse at his hands. In 1581, he attacked his pregnant daughter-in-law as a punishment for wearing revealing clothing, and the woman unfortunately lost her baby. Ivan's son, Ivan, finds out what his dad did to his wife and is justifiably pissed, so he confronts him. His dad had already banished his first 2 attempted marriages, now he did this? Come on! Well, Daddy Ivan classically loses it, but went a little too far, and he smacked his kid on the head with a scepter. It kills him, and it essentially sets the clock for a political crisis known as the Time of Troubles, that began with the extinction of the Rurik dynasty upon the infamous Friarda's death in 1598, and the depopulation of Russian provinces from Tartar incursions.
Number 5. Bad comrade. Josef Stalin was the leader of the Soviet Union for probably too long. A man who worked his way up the political chain until General Secretary meant leader, which, if you look it up, it's kind of crazy. That itself is a crazy story. He's responsible for a great loss of life. It is estimated in the range of 40 million people. Ooh, yikes. Most spooky evil dudes usually go after an enemy, to someone they consider to not be part of them. He did do this, but a lot of his own people sadly met their ends from the Red Menace too. Organized and deliberate purges of people and famines to starve people. It's safe to say he is and was and always will be one of the worst humans to ever walk the face of the earth. To put it in perspective, Stalin's son was a soldier in World War II, and after being captured by German forces, the Germans thought they had one on the boss. Heck, this was a get out of jail free card, right? Well, when a prisoner trade was proposed by the Germans, Stalin laughed at only how an evil communist could, and denied the trade. His son would later perish in a POW camp shortly after. What a monster. You think you trade with me? Keep them, I don't want. Number 4, fine white powder. Oh, to be in Miami in the mid-1980s. If I had one wish, it would be to spend a summer night in the neon-soaked beaches of Miami under strict laws enforced by a president who didn't know what was going on right underneath his nose. If you were around back then you probably got to experience something like that. Or at least in my fever dreams. I hope so. But as much as I'd like to be Tony Montana with all that sugar on his desk, I know it's bad for my health. Speaking of bad for your health, Pablo Escobar. I know, that's where I went with that. Probably the most ruthless criminal ever to live on planet Earth. Pablo was a poor man born in a poor country, but ended up being one of, if not the richest man on planet Earth. His lucrative distribution of adult sugar in the 80s made him very wealthy. It also made him very dangerous, as he was willing to do whatever to get his way. Extortion, bribing, bombing, just about anything you can think of. Oh yeah, he was one bad dude. He had so much money that he had to bury it all over Colombia. Every once in a while, some of his buried treasure pops up. And as much as I want a quick million in US cash, I'll just put it back where it came from. Oh, Dios mío, lo siento, Pablo. Number 3, Al Capone. Another ruthless criminal, and honestly, Capone walked so gangsters like Pablo could run. Part of the ruthless Italian mafia that was the outfit, Capone worked his way through the ranks during 1920s Prohibition America, earning millions in his time where really just $100 could stretch a long way. Capone is noted for his violent behavior throughout his life and the many accidents he caused directly or indirectly. Prohibition and the Depression were hard times for a lot of folks in America. However, the media and the people of Chicago at first always wanted to see what the lavish gangster was up to, as his criminal life became somewhat publicized. Most likely due to his wealth. The dude was rich. He eventually would get arrested and sent to Alcatraz, which was probably the worst prison in America, or the best Call of Duty Zombies map, depending on how you look at things. I look at things through a Call of Duty way, so Number 2, Gavrilo Princip. That might not be a name that you're familiar with, but it was the man who unalived Franz Ferdinand, which started World War I, which caused World War II, which caused the Cold War, which caused the collapse of Soviet Russia, and it's why you live in a post-war globalist world with markets developing rapidly in the cyber world. Except maybe the whole thing in Ukraine, watch out for that. Kinda crazy to think how all that could come from one wrong turn and a guy seizing an opportunity. But this also means he's kind of responsible, in a way, for all the bad stuff that happened in those times as well. So maybe don't seize the day, I'm not sure. Just don't be ruthless criminals, guys. Watch our videos instead. Although I could blame them for failing my math test in high school. Yeah, we'll go with that. Number 1, Mao Zedong. I'd like to come out here and tell you all about the chairman of China, but that simply is just too hot for TV, and if it's too hot for TV, it's too hot for YouTube. Basically, he was the dictator of communist China and is responsible for many lives lost. It's estimated to be somewhere in the range of 60 to 80 million people. Whoa! Dude was down bad, the definition of down bad, and although many were told to adore him, there's still a great many people who remember the terrible things he's done. From Beijing to Hong Kong, there's not a person around who doesn't know who he is. If being a no-good, rotten person was an Olympic sport, he would have gold medals coming out of his ears.
At number 10, the king of hobbies. Everyone has their interests, right? Like, for example, I like video games, and I like watching people scream at their teammates for not helping everyone else out. I'm looking at you, Blake. For kings back in the day, they didn't have people on Rocket League to scream at, so they had to find other interests. For Tsar Peter the Great, he had a lot of interests, and they were all very bizarre. Firstly, he had an obsession with short people, especially dwarves. To him, they were like his real-life dolls or something, and he would hold weddings for them and even hold lavish funerals, complete with small horses pulling a small coffin on a carriage and even a very short priest to hold the ceremony. But other than this obsession with short people, he also dabbled a bit in medicine. He liked watching surgeries be performed like he was trying to be on Grey's Anatomy or something, but when watching the surgeries just wasn't enough for him, he would sometimes perform them himself. Now remember, he's not a doctor, so it's no surprise to learn that these surgeries rarely ever went well and people died. I certainly wouldn't trust him to give me any kind of surgery, but he was a king so he could do whatever he wanted. Peter the Great also loved dentistry. It is said that if you wanted to get all buddy-buddy with the king, all you had to do was let him pull your tooth. Sounds like the guy was one heartbreak away from starting his own medical drama, but in the worst way.
Number 9, banning coffee. This is the worst of the worst, people. Murad IV, Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. The guy banned coffee coffee like an absolute monster. No more triples for you. He was born in 1612, and for the most part, his mother was ruling through him because he was so young. That's often the case with most of these young rulers. They just get, hey, you're 7, now you rule a kingdom, enjoy. It's tough, they're not gonna know what's going on. But when he got a little bit older, he put forth these laws, punishable by death, might I add, in order to get things back on track. That was the key. He banned coffee, tobacco, and alcohol. He would actually disguise himself as a civilian during the nighttime and would wander around aimlessly in hopes that he would find one of these dark roast renegades. If you were caught outside having a quick smoke break, you weren't arrested, you didn't get fined, but rather Murad IV himself would take your head off right there in the streets. No trial, no jury, just straight to execution. All because you're drinking a Bud Light Lime.
At number 8, why you mad? Now this could be a bit of a controversial opinion, but if your name includes the words the mad, I would assume that you're not doing too great, right? I mean, you have to earn that title, and if it's a title that harsh, that simply begs the question, what in the HE double hockey sticks did you do to get that name? Well, for Charles the Mad, he did a lot. Charles became king when he was only 11 years old, so that certainly didn't help his development, and knowing this kind of helps explain a lot of his actions. He was known for getting really angry and throwing fits of rage, and was known to give people the gift of the big sleep, if you know what I mean. Charles didn't always kill people though, only sometimes. Other times he liked to switch things up. Sometimes he would run around his palace pretending to be a wolf. Other times he would go through phases where he just really didn't want to keep up with his personal hygiene, and he would get so gross that he literally had to be cut out of his own clothes. Now I don't know how long you have to go without bathing to get to that point, but really I don't think I want to know the answer to that question. Charles also thought that he was made of glass, and so he would go through phases where he would sit completely still so that he didn't break. Kind of like Drax from Guardians of the Galaxy, but not as, extraterrestrial. Well, maybe he was. That honestly would explain a lot.
Number 7, party hard. Zhu Huzhou was the emperor of the Ming Dynasty in the early 1500s. Now, lately we've been talking about kings and queens. We're on part 2s for both now, and there's a good amount who simply just aren't ready. They're too young to rule. Like Joffrey from Game of Thrones. Kings like that actually existed. They were horrible. They were young, they were too young to know what was right and wrong. Plus, they usually have some corrupt parents whispering in their ears the entire time. Zhu took the throne at just age 14, and for a while, ministers were confident that he would grow into the role and become the leader that he was born to be. Well, when he got older, he transformed a zoo just outside of Beijing. He transformed it into his own personal brothel. Yum. I mean, on one hand, I'm glad the animals are free, but like a zoo? You couldn't find a more romantic place? Can convert an Applebee's to a brothel, maybe? I don't know, something with AC? His final days were spent partying, and some would say a little bit too hard. He got intoxicated and fell from a boat. That's how he ended his life. Honestly, not a bad way to go out. Pretty OG.
At number 6, love game. A lot of kings and queens throughout history have been known to engage in the horizontal hustle a lot. I mean, when you're a ruler of a kingdom, you don't really have much to do in your spare time, so what else are you gonna do? Play a board game? No. These monarchs were getting busy all the time, but there was one king who was just so obsessed with getting a good old pickle tickle that it just became his whole personality. King Philip V was known to be a nymphomaniac, and he liked doing the deed a lot, but because at the time, the Catholic Church said that having sexy time with anyone but your spouse was a sin, the king and his wife were getting busy all the time. Eventually, his first wife caught on to how to use this to her advantage, and she would often refuse to sleep with him until she got her way with anything she suggested or demanded from him. You would think that he would catch on to this game, but maybe his urges were just so strong because he always caved and gave her what he wanted. Obviously, this man did not follow Hoodville. Absolutely not. Just to give you guys an idea of how obsessed this guy was, when his wife was on her deathbed, before she went he literally tried to get one last bang in. On her deathbed. Like, dude, not the time.
Number 5, cat attacks. If I had to pick, I would of course say I'm 100% a dog person. I'm sorry, I grew up with 2 cats, I'm allergic. I grew up with 2 dogs, not allergic. Dog guy all the way, sorry. Cats are cool, but this next story just totally freaked me out. Back in 1870, this rich woman had put her time, energy, and resources into cat breeding. How lovely is that? She had tons of cats, she loved all of them, and they loved her. Again, I'm allergic, so I'm already sneezing just reading about this story. It was the 1800s, okay? A lot of candles, everything was obviously extremely flammable, and disaster hit often in Victorian times. And in 1870, a fire broke out at this young woman's home. The cats were trapped inside the house. Now, they made it outside, don't freak out or anything, they all made it out, but by the time the two maids had kicked the door open to rescue said cats, they had gone full primal. They were afraid, they were freaking out, they were just scratching their way out through anyone and everything. The fire in the house had obviously scared them, so when the doors were open, these two maids were both sadly attacked by all of these cats. What a horrible thank you for saving all of their lives. I pulled my cat's tail when I was younger. I learned real quick, never to do that ever again. Number 4, hiccups. Today we have many cures for hiccups. Yeah, you gotta get scared or hold your breath or drink water like while you're doing a handstand. I don't know, everyone's got weird ideas, whatever. But nothing was as dangerous as the Victorian era hiccup cure. Yeah, ready for this one? Don't try it. This one's scarier than a jump scare, that's for sure. In 1899, again in the good old Merck medical manual, it recommended using chloroform to cure your hiccups. Yeah, just completely damage your entire nervous system and poison your kidneys, for sure. To get rid of hiccups, that's way better. This 19th century anesthetic was not a solution. Never try this. Continue scaring your family and friends. That's definitely the way we handle hiccups now. Number 3, tapeworms. Back in the Victorian times, they really figured out the trick to weight loss. Yeah, was it watching what you eat, maybe counting your steps, maybe getting a gym membership, something like that? Nope, and no way. No, it was way easier than all those things combined. Can you believe that? And you didn't even have to pull back on how much you were consuming. Doesn't this sound fascinating? What is this? Well, all you needed was a handy tapeworm. Yep, I don't have one. I don't know why I pointed. That'd be gross if I had one. Yeah, tapeworm. You know those things that can kill you today if you get one? See, the plan was if you eat a tapeworm egg, okay, it will later hatch in your stomach, and at that point you could just eat anything you wanted. Because every time you ate, the tapeworm would also eat, so you could get your snack on while still rocking those Victorian skinny jeans, right? Tapeworm cyst pills, or go for a jog. Your call. Number 2, Victoria's reign. Queen Victoria's reign started in 1837 and it lasted until the Queen's death later on in 1901. At just age 18, Alexandrina Victoria had to rise up to the throne. She was born, of course, on May 24th, 1819. Queen Victoria was 5th in line when she was born, so right off the bat, it was actually highly unlikely that she would ever get the crown. Then one by one, out of nowhere, all of her family members began passing away suddenly. In 4 years, 3 of Victoria's cousins passed away, and then her father and grandfather both died a week apart from each other. So by the time 1830 rolled around, Victoria was only 11 years old, and already she was next in line for the throne. That's how fast it happens. So as if that wasn't already stressful enough, Victoria was brought up under the Kensington system, which if you haven't heard of before, it's pretty awful. Victoria's mother, Duchess Victoria of Kent, she created this Kensington system to control her daughter. She literally isolated the child from mates or family members, anything fun or social, you name it. Her mother did this to keep her pure, of course, to keep her the most pure lady. This system sounds awful. Her mother would monitor her every action, including who she can see or speak to. Victoria only had 2 playmates growing up. That's it. I'm like, hey, me too. She had her half-sister, Princess Fedora of Leamington, and the Duchess attendant Sir John Conroy, his daughter, Victoire. I mean, only 3 friends growing up, that's cruel. She shared a room with her mother until she was finally queen. Yeah, she couldn't walk down the hallway alone at any point. She had to always walk with her mother by her side, even to the washroom. That's crazy. Victoria has reflected on her childhood since, and yeah, she hates John Conroy for manipulating her mother, and she actually refers to him as Demon Incarnate, so that's good. It's a nice nickname. Incarnate? He's a demon. He's the worst. Let's just call him that. And finally, number 1, royal enemies. Being the queen and all, a security team is of course needed at all times. And during her reign, there were multiple attempts to harm the young Queen Victoria. The first attack was back in 1840. It was a young guy named Edward Oxford, and he attacked the Queen's carriage. Just ran at it like a crazy guy. Obviously, and thankfully, nothing happened. But when Edward was later accused of high treason, he was actually found not guilty due to insanity. Then a couple years later, in 1842, it happened again, but this time it was 2 men attacking the carriage. And then in 1849, her carriage was attacked by William Hamilton. In 1850, as the carriage was passing the gates of Buckingham Palace, Robert Pate, a retired soldier, ran up and hit the carriage with his cane. He was going nuts as well. Everyone wants this carriage. This is like the ultimate, no one's getting through this carriage apparently. Victoria was okay, luckily, but of course she was shook after all these events. Then again in 1842, 1849, 1872, attempt after attempt, it was horrifying. But then things got a little worse. with a man named Boy Jones. Yeah, this guy stalked the Queen from 1838 until 1841. This guy somehow managed to break into Buckingham Palace more than once. He knew a way in just to Buckingham Palace, which should never be a thing in the first place. And the weird part is here, Boy Jones, once he was inside the palace, he would hide under the Queen's sofa, and he would also just sit on her throne for hours, just hanging out. Yeah, he would pretend he's Cersei Lannister and just sit on the throne for a minute or two. Think about life. Eventually, thankfully, he got caught, but imagine coming home and Boy Jones is sitting on your couch. You're like, what are you doing? Take that shirt off, get out of here.
Not so British after all. If you're like me, then you're most likely not gonna be royalty. Although being a prince would be pretty cool, I just don't have the pure bloodline to be royalty, but neither does the Queen of England. When you think of old Blighty and her royal throne, you think of pure British descent, but you'd be wrong. The House of Windsor is actually Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, which, if you couldn't tell, doesn't exactly scream tea and crumpets. The German-sounding name became an issue in the early 20th century due to the First World War breaking out against two-time war loser Germany. Britain needing to inspire its citizens to defeat Germany, which at the time it was really anyone's game, so to help inspire the people, King George V changed the name to Windsor. After all, it's kind of difficult to fight someone when you have more in common than differences. Not to mention that there were a lot of Germanic influences around, so really, it was a bad look and a great marketing decision.
At number 9, Charles the Tampon? Yeah, we're getting weird. Relationships are kind of weird. I mean, they can be great, don't get me wrong, but they have a weird side too. Every couple is different and they have their thing. Some have a show that they like to watch together, others have their songs, and some have little sayings that they've come up with. But those are the more tame quirks that some couples have. Others, however, can get very bizarre, but many of them probably can't add up to the strange things that have been said between Prince Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles. As we all know, Prince Charles was first married to Princess Diana, and it's no secret that they had a pretty tough relationship. Theirs was certainly not a happy marriage, and they each had their own affairs with other people while they were married. During their marriage, Charles was still pretty hung up on Camilla, the woman he was told he couldn't have, and who was also married to someone else. This minor obstacle, however, didn't stop them from getting freaky, at least over the phone. In 1992, the year that Charles and Diana announced their separation, a steamy phone conversation between Charles and Camilla was leaked, and it was super weird. In the call, Charles was simping like no other, saying things like how he wished he could live in Camilla's pants as a pair of panties, and even expressed his desire to be Camilla's tampon. Like, what? Charles, stop it. Ew. This leak became a scandal called Tampon Gate, and as you can imagine, this wasn't good for the royals. But I guess it still kind of worked out for Charles, since after all that he finally got the girl he wanted and perhaps got to live out his dream of being a box of Tampax or something. I don't know. I really don't want that mental image. Moving on.
Number 8. Comrade Cousin? King George V and Tsar Nicholas II were rulers of vast empires in the early 20th century. You'd think the similarities between these two monarchs end there, but in reality, these two royal men were much closer than the public thought. Georgie and Nicky were first cousins. That's right, first cousins. Even though their respected empires were culturally different and separated by hundreds of miles, the two men were immediate family. Looking at images of the royals together doesn't require a DNA test to understand that they're related. They look identical and could easily be mistaken for twins. Unfortunately for Nicholas, when the Russian Revolution was in full swing, the Romanov family went into isolation after Nicholas abdicated his throne. While there were attempts to thwart the coup. Nicky's cousin wasn't the best aid. Just goes to show you that sometimes you can't rely on a guy who looks exactly like you because royalty has pretty messed up bloodlines.
At number 7, killer date. What is the worst date that you've ever been on? What kinds of weird people have you met through your dating history? I'm sure there are some pretty wild and crazy stories out there, but I'm guessing that very few of them would even come close to the insane dating story from Princess Beatrice and how she literally dated a killer. In 2006, when Princess Beatrice was 17 years old, she got into a relationship with an American playboy named Paolo Luzzo. Paolo was an arguably shady guy, judging by the fact that he was arrested on a manslaughter charge before getting with Beatrice. Paolo was accused of ending the life of 19-year-old Jonathan Duchalier after beating the guy to death. Yeah, what a catch, right? Shockingly, Paolo's charges were reduced to a less severe charge, and he still got to date a princess after all of this. He even broke his probation to go on a trip to the French Alps with Princess Beatrice. How he finessed life so hard, I have no idea, but either way, their relationship only lasted a short amount of time. I can't say it's a good look for a member of the royal family to be seen with someone with such a dark past.
Number 6. The Princess. The tragic loss of Princess Diana affected not only the UK but people around the globe. She was known for her courage and her willingness to help those in need, and had the nerve to speak her mind. Her shocking demise isn't met without controversy. In fact, it may be the biggest controversy of the royal family. There is some evidence that points in the direction that the royal family was behind her death. Diana had proclaimed to her guards that her car was having issues, and even stated in a private letter to her butler that she had some reasonable fear that her life was in danger. In a nutshell, the royal family disapproved of the princess's new lover, even though Charles had clearly been up to no good himself. So in order for Charles to remarry and stop the gutter storm in the tabloids that Diana was going to create, they maybe sort of organized the accident that did end her life. Well, good thing that's over, and after this, there won't be any more controversy for the family, right?
In our number 6 spot today, we have the Rockefeller family. The Rockefeller family is a very prominent American family that has played a very significant role in business, politics, philanthropy, and society for over a century. The family's wealth really started out with John D. Rockefeller, who founded the Standard Oil Company in the late 19th century and became one of the richest men in history. John actually had a major impact on the American economy, transforming the oil industry and creating a very vast empire that completely dominated the market. His business practices, including aggressive competition and horizontal integration, drew both admiration as well as criticism. The Rockefellers also had a hand in helping the construction of the United Nations, and they also founded Bilderberg, which is where the most powerful people in the world meet up. Other notable members of the Rockefeller family include Nelson Rockefeller, who served as governor of New York and vice president of the United States, and David Rockefeller, who was a very prominent banker and philanthropist. The family continues to be involved in various industries and philanthropic activities, with some estimates suggesting that their combined wealth is in the billions of dollars. Some out there also believe that the Rockefeller family now controls things, but in secret, through oil companies like ExxonMobil and BP, as well as through banks like Chase Manhattan Bank. In our number 4 spot today, we have the House of Saud. The House of Saud is the ruling royal family of Saudi Arabia, and they have been in power since the country was founded in 1932. Over the years, the House of Saud has maintained its grip on power through a combination of political alliances, military force, and religious legitimacy. The family has also been able to leverage its vast oil wealth to consolidate its power both domestically and internationally. When the vast oil resources hidden in Saudi Arabia were found, it not only completely changed the economy of the nation, but it also catapulted the House of Saud into the world of richest families ever. The current king of Saudi Arabia is King Salman, who ascended to the throne in 2015 following the death of his half-brother King Abdullah. The current king's son, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, is widely regarded as the de facto ruler of the country. Of course, because of their mass amount of wealth and their current political position, it is no wonder this royal family remains on the list of powerful families in the world. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Bush family. The Bush family is a very prominent American political family that has produced 2 US presidents, several other notable politicians, and successful business people. The story of the Bush dynasty really starts off with Prescott Sheldon Bush, who was a successful businessman and US senator from Connecticut. Allegedly, he became a member of a group called Skull and Bones and apparently was behind the failed military coup in 1933, which was aimed at taking power away from Franklin Roosevelt. During the Second World War, he was also the head of the Union Banking Corporation. This is all fine and well until the bank was impounded due to their connections with, well, you know who, the evil head of the Second World War. The Bush legacy continued on with his son, George H.W. Bush, who served as vice president under Ronald Reagan and was later elected president in 1988. George H.W. Bush's son, George W. Bush, served as governor of Texas and was also elected president, serving from 2001 to 2009. For people around my age, this is probably the most well-known member of the Bush family, and that is due to the multiple scandals surrounding his presidency, which would include the Iraq War as well as the response to Hurricane Katrina. Other notable members of the Bush family include Jeb Bush, another son of George H.W., who served as governor of Florida and ran unsuccessfully for president in 2016, as well as Neil Bush, who is also a businessman. Overall, the Bush family has had a significant impact on American politics and public life, and their legacy continues to be felt today. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Cook family. The legacy of the Cook family dynasty story really all starts back with the founding of the Cook Company. The company was founded by Fred C. Cook in 1940 and was later taken over by his sons Charles and David, who transformed it into a major conglomerate. Today, Cook Industries generates billions of dollars in revenue and employs tens of thousands of people around the world. The Cook brothers were also known for their significant involvement in conservative politics and advocacy. They were major donors to a variety of causes and organizations that promoted limited government, free markets, and individual liberty. The brothers also founded and supported a number of think tanks and political organizations, including the Cato Institute, Americans for Prosperity, and the Charles Cook Foundation, of course. David Cook did pass away a few years ago in 2019, but Charles is still involved, and Cook Industries is said to bring in over $1 trillion in annual revenue, which makes it one of the largest private firms in America. Some speculate that this mass fortune is sometimes used to assist in having a hand in political influence. Finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have the Soros family. This family is perhaps best known for its patriarch, George Soros, who is a billionaire investor. Born in Hungary in 1930 and surviving through the atrocities of the Second World War, George would later become a very successful investor, earning his fortune through his hedge fund, Soros Fund Management. It is said that George and his success could largely be attributed to a very famous moment in history. On September 16, 1992, George helped his fund bring in $1 billion in a single day, and he did this by short selling the British pound. This day would go on to become known as Black Wednesday and went on to solidify him being known as, quote, the man who broke the Bank of England. Today, his family, which includes his children, is among the most powerful families in the world due to their active geopolitical actions. Their influence and interest extends beyond the financial sector, as they are also heavily active in politics as well. Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot, we have Cleopatra and Ptolemy VIII. We'll head over to 47 BC, at a time where ancient Egypt was a little different. We often think of Cleopatra's end, but the beginning of her life was quite hectic as well, even for the royal family. Cleopatra had 2 younger brothers who both ruled with her after the death of their father, Ptolemy XII. Ptolemy XIII initially ruled with Cleopatra. They were a historical duo, but they soon became rivals. Ptolemy wanted the throne to himself, so he attempted to seize control of Egypt. This led to a civil war in which Cleopatra was exiled. However, after Caesar defeated Ptolemy's army and restored Cleopatra to the throne, Ptolemy XIII drowned in the Nile River while attempting to flee a battle. Talk about family drama. I thought mine was bad, but dang. In our number 9 spot today, we have King Henry VIII. Henry's marriages were significant in the history of England because they played a major role in the English Reformation and the establishment of the Church of England as a separate entity from the Catholic Church. Yeah, a few of those family scandals ought to do it. Catherine of Aragon, Henry's first wife, he quickly divorced after she failed to produce a male heir. Anne Boleyn, Henry's second wife, who he of course married immediately after his divorce from Catherine, a little sketchy, well, she was later accused of adultery and treason and lost her head. It wasn't good. Jane Seymour, Henry's third wife, gave him this long-awaited male heir, Edward VI. Sadly, she died soon after giving birth. Next was Anne, Henry's fourth wife, whom he married for political reasons but found unattractive and divorced shortly after. He saw a painting of her before and she didn't match the image. Swear to God that's what happened. Like, what in the Tinder? This guy is absolutely insane. Next was Catherine Howard, Henry's fifth wife, who was only 17 at the time. She was accused of adultery and also lost her life. Catherine Parr, Henry's sixth and final wife, survived him for a change and went on to marry again after his death. Divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded, survived, alright? Study that for your history test. In our number 8 spot today, we have Julia the Elder. Julia Caesaris was the only biological child of Roman Emperor Augustus. She was born in 39 BC and was married to Marcus Claudius Marcellus, but later got caught up in a series of scandals that brought shame to her family. So much so that her father actually exiled her to a small island off of the coast of Italy in 2 BC. She remained in exile for several years and her marriage to Marcellus was annulled. In 2 AD, Augustus allowed her to return back to the mainland, but she was still considered an outcast and was forced to live in seclusion for the rest of her life. This was less than 10 years after her mother had suffered suffered the same fate. What an absolute nightmare. In our number 7 spot today, we have King James I. We're taking it back to Scotland in 1425. King James I ordered the death of a powerful nobleman who just also happened to be James' cousin. Murdoch Stewart, Duke of Albany, was the grandson of King Robert II and had served as regent for James while he was imprisoned in England. However, once James returned to Scotland, he suspected Murdoch of plotting against him. Murdoch and several of his followers were arrested and killed in Stirling Castle. King James' actions were seen as a ruthless demonstration of his power and authority, and he faced quite a bit of criticism for this harsh treatment. In our number 6 spot today, we have John the Fearless. In 1407, Duke of Burgundy John the Fearless ordered the death of Duke of Orleans Louis I, aka John's cousin. A lot of cousin rivalries in this list. At the time, of course, he was his political rival in the French court, but what is happening? The two men were powerful and influential members of the French nobility, and their feud had been building for quite some time. See, John believed that Louis was a threat to his power, and he had also insulted him publicly, which for sure doesn't help the case. Louis was ambushed and killed by a group of armed men in the streets of Paris. John was heavily criticized for his actions, and the incident even went as far as to spark a civil war in France. The conflict lasted for several years and resulted in political instability and, sadly, lots of lives lost in France.
A family gang of 4 so ferocious they have a catchy nickname to prove it: the Benders. The Benders settled in isolated Labette County, Kansas in the early 1870s following the New Spiritualism movement. This is because Kate, in her early 20s, was renowned for performing seances that showed off her psychic abilities at the store inn that the family ran. But this wasn't as picturesque as it seems. Historians are very confident that the Benders, living as a husband, wife, young adult son, young adult daughter dynamic, actually weren't even related, and none of them were even named Bender. Well, it'd be no biggie if it wasn't for the fact so many people who happened to pass through Labette County never made it to their final destinations, including a well-known local doctor, William York. After a community meeting about York, attended by both of the male Benders, it resulted in a search party formation, and it was soon noted that the Bender homestead appeared recently abandoned and full of evidence. Near the table where the guests were served was a trap door, and the foul-smelling hole beneath the door was just full of blood and gross stuff. The ground in an orchard nearby the house has been carefully plowed, but one small section was noticeably indented. The ground was dug up and revealed the decomposed body of Mr. York. 8 more bodies are found, skulls crushed, throats cut. Guests at the inn were urged to sit at the place of honor, which was a curtain dividing the house's rooms. While dining, the guest of honor would be hit in the head with a hammer from behind the curtain, his throat cut, and then his body dropped in the trap door to the cellar Sweeney Todd style. Their motive? Robbery or the thrill of it? Nobody actually knows, because despite a reward and several substantial claims of their capture at the hands of various posses, the Benders appear to have gotten away with it, and their grim story continues to intrigue. One of the few mafiastos to be executed is Louis Lepke Butchialter. Nicknamed Lepkele, Little Louis in Yiddish, then shortened to Lepke, this crime boss was a quiet man for years, managed to avoid public spotlight. In conversations with criminal associates, Lepke preferred listening over talking. He was an overall nice man, appreciated by the community for how he aided his neighbors. He generously compensated his crew members and took them to hockey games, boxing matches, and even winter cruises. He married a widower named Betty and adopted Betty's child from the previous marriage. In the early 1930s, Lepke created an effective process of performing contract killings for the Cosa Nostra mobsters. It had no name, but the press 10 years later called it Murder Inc. The Cosa Nostra mobsters wanted to insulate themselves from any connection to these killings. So, Lepke's partner would relay the contract request from the Costra to Lepke, who would assign it to a street member who had no connections with any major crime family. If they were caught, they could not implicate the Costra members in the crime. They were soon completing jobs all over the country for their mobster bosses, grossing over $1 million in profit per year. Ultimately, Lepke is cornered and forced to surrender after 3 years of hiding when the killing of Josef Rosen, an informant, goes awry. He's tried for the killing of Rosen alongside 3 other murders, and Lepke is found guilty and sentenced to death. He exhausts his 4 appeals, but is executed by electric chair in 1944. You never know your neighbors, especially if they were Inessa, Roman, and their daughters. Inessa, a kindergarten teacher, and Roman, a successful dentist. Together, Inessa's daughters from her first marriage, 25-year-old Victoria, and just shy of legal daughter Anastasia, Anastasia are responsible for the violent deaths of at least 30 people across southern Russia. Inessa and her family were highly organized, using information from Roman's sister and brother-in-law who had police connections to organize their crimes around police activity. This is because Inessa liked to go after police officers, as one had left her for another woman in the past. And her current husband didn't feel like she was living in the past either? Okay, alright. Their victims weren't exclusively police officers, however. The family MO was breaking and entering the houses of sleeping families while they road tripped under the guise of going on monthly camping trips. One victim was a police officer named Ivan, who was killed when he attempted to stop members of the gang from fleeing the scene of the crime. Roman was eventually killed in a bloody standoff with police, and Inessa was arrested. A search of the family home uncovered a slew of weaponry, a complete arsenal. Inessa, Anastasia, and Victoria all confessed to their crimes, the 6-year reign ending. Vladimir Markin, the chief of Russia's equivalent to the FBI, said, "I'm sure that when they were together, one could hardly imagine that they could even plan a crime." It sounds so much more innocent than it is. The Bean Clan. Picturesque Scotland, a land of mystery and rolling dewy fields, glens, and hills that 100% have eyes. That's right, we're talking about the freaks who inspired the nauseating horror movie that we're never gonna forget anytime soon. Back in the 16th century, Alexander Bean and his partner, Black Agnes Douglas, set up home in a hidden sea cave and started popping out babies. Why? I don't know. Why a cave? Again, I don't know. Maybe they just wanted the saltiest and driest sinuses and intercourse ever. Well, the weirdos never left that cave, and they never let any of the kids leave it either. By keeping it in the family, the clan eventually grew to about 45 members, all starting from just the 2. Jobs were hard to come by when you're not part of society, and potentially terrifying looking from inbreeding, so why not just murk and eat travelers whenever you're feeling peckish or want a new shirt? That's exactly what they did, operating only at night and retiring to their cave by day, where they could enjoy a roasted meal of unfortunate victims and rest like weird hick vampires. Locals had no idea what was going on because they weren't being picked away at like croutons from the veggie tray, and the Bean Clan survived doing this for 25 years, munching down on what's estimated to be about 1,000 people. Naturally, it eventually gets found out by the locals, and they decide to do an old-fashioned mob style on this one. They descend on the cave and cut the off the men, followed by their hands and feet, leaving them to bleed to death. Everyone else was burnt alive. I'm sure if they could have, these weirdos would have attended their own massacre just to snack on their own cooking remains. And now the most dysfunctional family in history, the Ptolemies. The last dynasty of Greek Egypt. Their first 3 monarchs of the dynasty were capable, vigorous sorts that did things like build the great library at Alexandria on their weekends off. But from the 4th century forward, it was nightmarish. It's like they were on a game show where you tried to kill as many of your close relatives as you were able, preferably in as painful and public of a way as possible. This is complicated for 2 reasons. 1, they kept the names in the family. Men were always named Ptolemy, and women 9 times out of 10 were called Cleopatra. 2, they kept their seed in the family too, following the Egyptian tradition, brother and sister wed and had children. This means it's not easy to explain who is killing whom. What follows offered is a kind of prose poem compiled of examples dedicated to the most bestial family in history. Alright, so Ptolemy V was the nicest of the later Ptolemy and thoughtfully had his mother's killers ripped apart by a mob. Ptolemy VI fought his own brother for the throne and then married his sister Cleopatra II. Ptolemy IV kills his mom, who had killed her husband for having a love affair with her mother. Ptolemy VIII was a great enemy of Ptolemy VI and the probable killer of Ptolemy VII. He also married Cleopatra II and then began an affair with Cleopatra's daughter, Cleopatra III. So Ptolemy VIII had Ptolemy VI dismembered and the pieces sent to the mother, Cleopatra II. I could keep going, like for hours. They burned, cooked, eviscerated, literally anything you can think of, they did to one another. All of this comes down to the bottom of the family tree, Cleopatra VII, the daughter of Ptolemy XII, the famous Caesar-loving, Mark Antony-loving Cleopatra who blew Egypt out of the water. I need a water break after that.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have the Murdochs. With the high profile of this ongoing case, coupled with the fact that Netflix just released a chilling documentary about the story of this family, it is likely that you may already have quite the idea of who the Murdoch family is. Taylor and I have been watching the documentary series. We're past the first few episodes, and man, is this story wild. A few years ago, if someone asked you who the Murdoch family was, you would have likely described them as one of the most powerful families in South Carolina, with a legal dynasty that has spanned for a century. Now, if I asked you that same question, the answer would be a family who had it all: money, money, power, status, but some of the members flew a little too close to the sun, tragedy ensued, and now people have lost their lives and the family has been destroyed. It started back in 2015 with the death of Stephen Smith. It carries on to 2018 when Gloria Satterfield, a long-serving employee for the family, was found passed away after a quote trip and fall accident. These events are both horrible and completely atrocious, but despite the rumors, mysteries, and alleged conspirators of these deaths, things really started to unravel for the family in February of 2019 with the death of Mallory Beach. The young woman met her untimely fate after a boating accident where, allegedly, 19-year-old Paul Murdoch was at the wheel, intoxicated. We could spend hours and hours talking about this family and all of these cases and the conspiracies, but we're short for time, which brings me right to the most recent tragedy. The 2021 killings of that same Murdoch who was driving the boat, as well as the killing of his mother, Margaret. Now, I do believe that people are innocent until proven guilty, but it is important to note that the one on trial for these killings right now is the father and husband to the deceased, Alex Murdoch, the patriarch of the family who is supposed to be carrying on that Murdoch legacy. The stories surrounding this family are horrific, tragic, and a reminder of the dangers that money and power can bring. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Sacklers. This family is the one behind the dynasty of Purdue Pharma, who is best known for producing an exceptionally strong prescription painkiller. Of course, we all know just how big and rich a pharmaceutical company could get, especially one that has been around for quite some time. The company was first created in 1952 by 3 Brooklyn-born brothers, and in the beginning, the company mostly dealt in things like laxatives and earwax removal methods. Soon, things for the company took quite an upwards turn, and before anyone knew it, the family was regarded as one of the most esteemed New York families, but they were also known for their philanthropic tendencies, with their names on museums and hospitals, some of the most famous in the world. You see, the thing is, when they released this painkiller in 1995, it led to them amassing an insane $13 billion fortune. That is obviously incredible, but the trouble came when it was realized that this painkiller wasn't nearly as potent as it was marketed to be, and frequent users would be building up a tolerance to it, meaning they needed to use higher and higher dosages. Viewer, welcome to the opioid crisis. Basically, this all spiraled out of control and led to many lawsuits coming against Purdue Pharma, not only by individuals, but by January 2019, 36 states were suing the company for what the painkiller had done to their citizens. After 2 years of deliberations, the Sacklers finally reached a deal with plaintiffs in bankruptcy court in September of 2021. As part of their Chapter 11 proposal, they agreed to pay $4.5 billion and give up all ownership of the company in exchange for complete immunity and all future opioid liability. Despite this fall from grace, the Sacklers were able to move an alleged $1.36 billion into offshore accounts, so despite their bankruptcy filing and the large sum of money handed over, they will continue to retain quite a large amount of their personal wealth. In our number 8 spot today, we have the Bakers. Jim and Tammy Faye Baker were once the most famous televangelists in America, and they certainly were living in quite a lap of luxury. They had beautiful homes, expensive cars, and a ton of money, but that quickly came crashing down amid horrendous scandal. In the late 1980s, after much success, Jim Baker resigned from the PTL ministry after there was a cover-up to hide some hush money that had been given to church secretary Jessica Hahn over an alleged SA situation. Of course, not necessarily a surprise, but definitely not a good look for a televangelist. This led to more interest in people looking into the family more, and soon it was uncovered that there was some sort of accounting fraud going on as well. The consequences for this came by way of felony charges, conviction, imprisonment, and divorce. That was the end of that legacy, but since serving his time, Jim Baker hasn't exactly slowed down. He not only remarried and returned to televangelism, but he also currently hosts the Jim Baker Show, which focuses on the end times and the second coming of Christ while promoting emergency survival products. So, that's interesting. In our number 7 spot today, we have Prince Sado. Born in 1735, Prince Sado was the heir to the Korean throne, but unfortunately, he would go on to suffer from extreme mental illness and delusions. Thankfully for historians and those of us interested in history, the wife of the prince created memoirs, and in them she detailed the horrifying things that happened next. The prince began to kill. He began to hurt and torment people. He basically turned their home into a house of horrors. The prince also endured some pretty horrific treatment from his own father, which of course is not an excuse for the things he did, but it definitely did not help the scenario. Eventually, the family had enough and realized that his behavior would go on to ruin the name of their family forever, so something needed to be done. At the time, tradition stated that if the prince were to be executed, his wife and child would also need to be, but everyone thought that maybe that was a bit too far. Why should they have to pay for his crimes? This led to the king coming up with quite the bizarre workaround for this. On a hot day in July, the king forced the prince to step into a rice chest, which was then locked behind him. This acted as a way to make it seem like he had caused his own death, which is said to have occurred just a few days later. In our number 6 spot today, we have Don Carlos. This little troublemaker never made it to the title of king, but he sure was a little too close for comfort when you hear about the kinds of things he was doing. Carlos was the Prince of Asturias in the mid-1500s, as he was the eldest son of King Philip II of Spain. It is said that Carlos may have had some troubles right from birth, which many believe could be due to inbreeding that was common in the family at the time. Descriptions of his behaviors, though, are far worse than what anyone could have expected. It is said that Carlos did horrible things like hurting or taking the lives of animals for fun. Nowadays, we call that a huge warning sign for potential killers. Back then, it was like, I don't know. Was anybody even watching you, really? It is even said that at one point he purposefully blinded all of the horses in the royal stable. Soon, of course, his cruelties would extend to humans, with people claiming that one time he chose to harm a servant girl for no reason other than because he could. Major King Joffrey vibes in that one. And apparently one time he made a shoemaker eat a pair of shoes that he had made that the prince didn't like. He was just a little twerp. Carlos was set up by his family to marry the eldest daughter of King Henry II, but after a few hours with the man, she decided that there was absolutely no way in hell. Like, he was so bad that she would rather marry his dad. Which she did in 1560. In the end, Carlos was found to be plotting to take out his own father, which landed him in prison in solitary confinement, where he passed away 6 months later.
They were good, and then they were great, and then they were absolute trash. The Amenhotep. Alright, so on the top of the bucket we got Amen I. He's the great-great-granddaddy. He effectively extended Egypt's boundaries into Nubia. Next is great-granddaddy Amen II, who was an army leader with famous archery and battle skills. Supposedly he was able to shoot arrows straight through a thick of copper plates. His athletic ability was incredible, and he was known to have rowed a ship faster than 200 of Egypt's strongest navy men. Next is Granddaddy Amen III, who built himself endless monuments and temples. Perhaps his most famous construction was the Temple of Luxor in Thebes. This temple has become one of the grandest and most famous temples in Egypt. His diplomatic relations allowed art and culture to flourish, and his building projects are legendary. And then there's disastrous Daddy Akhenaten, or Amen IV. This nutcase was obsessed with the sun god Atum and changed his name, appearance, politics, lifestyle, anything he could to feel closer to his lord. This pharaoh was so hated that Egyptians themselves wiped his name from their history. He moved Egypt's capital from Thebes to Amarna and then renamed it in Egyptian to mean the horizon of Aten, and then ordered a new capital city be built there, moving an estimated 20,000 people over to make it. When he enforced monotheism, Og failed to realize that the temples of Egypt were the nation's socio-economic cultural hubs. It was the god priests that oversaw all of their industries, so without them, those pillars of the communities were just gone. And stripping these temples of authority, he caused Egypt's biggest reception. And then we've got the bottom of the bucket, we have our boy Tukmahad, aka King Tut, who by his 3rd year changed his name to Tukmahad and issued decree restoring temples, images, personnel, and privileges of the old gods to undo what his dad had done. He also began the protracted process of restoring the sacred shrines of Amun, which had been severely damaged during his father's rule. No proscription or persecution of Aten, though, Akhenaten's god, was undertaken, and royal vineyards and regiments of the army were still named after Aten. Tukmahad unexpectedly died in his 19th year. Whatever the case, he died without designating an heir. This is another 4-part family tree. First, great-granddaddy Snerfu founds the 4th dynasty and marries the daughter of the last pharaoh of the 3rd empire, thus helped to solidify his possession as the pharaoh of the new dynasty, as well as secure Khufu's place in the line of succession. Meanwhile, his son, who becomes Granddaddy Khufu, pops out the Great Pyramid of Giza, one of the 7 wonders of the world. Apparently we were so impressed by this that we forgot to write anything else about him or why he did this because we know very little about Khufu. We know he reigned 23 years between 2500 and 2566, and we know he married his sister. Shocker. Khufu traded for highly rare items, prizing both construction materials and precious materials like copper and turquoise, and so he developed the mining industry in Egypt. Limestone and granite were also quarried in vast amounts for rather large building projects that he was working on. Built over a period of 27 years, the Great Pyramid is undoubtedly Khufu's greatest legacy. Khufu's children include 9 sons and 6 daughters, including Defreya and Khafre, who would both become pharaohs following his death. When in power, his son Defreya moved 8 kilometers north of Giza and established a new necropolis on a higher leveled ground. Defreya's pyramid was quarried for its stone, and as such, there's very little of it left standing today. Meanwhile, the underson Khafre succeeded the short-lived Radifi and married his sister and 2 other queens who were probably his sisters. Best known for his pyramid, one of the 3 great pyramids of Giza, and also best known for the Sphinx, which bears his likeness on its face. And who else but the Ramses clan? The Ramses I gets the throne in a super uneventful way. He was friend and confidant to the former pharaoh who didn't have a single heir. Then Ramses spent all of his free time marrying all 4 of his daughters. Meanwhile, his son, Seti I, led a great army of 60,000 men and fought in many battles north of Palestine and Syria. King Ramesses II, son of Seti I, was able to finish his father's work by beating the Hittite army in battle of Kadesh and creating the first documented peace treaty in history. Ramses II went on to declare himself a god and rule Egypt for 67 years before dying of natural causes at 90, which is insane in an era where life expectancy was 30. But before getting to that ripe old age, Ramses spent any free time he had chasing anything with 2 feet and a heartbeat, enough to sire 100 to 200 children in his lifetime. He even outlived 12 of his own sons, leaving no heir. They're back again, the Ptolemies. People loved learning about this batch of literal bastards in the recent top 10 powerful families in history you didn't want to mess with video. Apparently y'all like when I'm doing tongue twisters. For those who don't know why this family could be a tongue twister, an important note is that they always recycled the family names. Men always named Ptolemy, and women always named Cleopatra or Berenice. They also happen to really take the old Egyptian ideology of royals only being with other royals a little too seriously. What's created is a massive family tree, one full of manipulation, contempt, scandal, and brash killings. While the Ptolemies started off strong, building the Library of Alexandria, compiled a star catalog and the earliest surviving table of trigonomic function, and establishing mathematically that an object is and its mirror image must make an equal angles to be a mirror. After the 4th, however, the family became like the Kardashians, talentless and messy. They took up everybody's time, but nobody stopped the free entertainment. So, like last time, let me limber up and I'll run us through some of the notorious BS. Ptolemy IV killed his mother, who had killed her husband, who was having a love affair with her mother, and then married his sister Arinso III, who was then later killed after Ptolemy IV died. Ptolemy XII annoyed his children so much, particularly his daughter Berenice IV, that they rebelled against him and drove him from Egypt. Berenice IV ruled briefly. She probably had her sister killed. She certainly had her husband strangled, who wasn't a family member. She was beheaded on the orders of her father. Ptolemy XII. Ptolemy XIV was the younger brother of Cleopatra VII, that's the Mark Antony one, and possibly poisoned by that same sister. Ptolemy VII was then killed by his uncle, the next Ptolemy VIII, at a wedding feast, or he may have been killed by his own father, Ptolemy IV. Scholars disagree. It's so messy, my mouth's so dry. Let's go on to the next one. Our favorite bearded lady was part of this family. It's the Thutmose line. Granddaddy Thutmose I became king after Amenhotep died without an heir. Probably one of the previous monarch's generals, he came to the throne around age 40 and is thought to have ruled for a little over 10 years. Historians have generally described Thutmose II as a frail and ineffectual, just the sort of person that a purposely shrewish Hatshepsut could push around. Public monuments, however, depict a dutiful Hatshepsut standing appropriately next to her husband. Wife to Tut II, Hatshepsut failed in the more important duty of producing a son. So when Thut II died young in 1497, yet again, the throne went to a harem child. Duly named Thutmose III, this child was destined to become one of the great warrior kings of Egypt. But at the time of his father's death, he was too young to take the rule. As widow, Hat became regent leader until Thut came of age. Within a few years, however, she proclaimed herself pharaoh, a vile upstart. And the 7 years past that point, she'd taken up cross-dressing imagery. Once depicted as slim and graceful queen is now full-blown, flail and crook-wielding king with the broad, bare chest of a man and the pharaoh false beard, but also still long flowing hair and feminine features. Upon Hat's death in 1458, her stepson, then likely in his early 20s, finally ascended to the throne. Thutmose III was a skilled warrior who brought Egypt's empire to the zenith of its power by conquering all of Syria and crossing the Euphrates. The spoils from his many wars made Thutmose III the richest man in the world. His military accomplishments are recorded on the numerous monuments he built himself. So to start, it's Genghis Khan. That's probably the most obvious start in this case. Good old Genghis was the ruler and emperor of the Mongol Empire, the largest empire in history. How'd he do that? Well, even if they were outnumbered, which they usually were, the Mongols were masters of tactical and psychological warfare. They always had one-time offer for any city or civilization they came across. If this people in the town surrendered, the Mongols would treat them well and allow them the fruits of a secure world. They had considerable personal liberty, religious freedoms, and overall more rights. Once the Mongols were in power, their land was safe and well controlled. If, however, the people resisted the Mongol advance, they and their cities would feel the full fury of the enraged invaders. The Mongols were violent, decapitating a path from the west shores of the Black Sea to the Pacific. Some experts calculate that fully 11% of the world's population died because of the Mongol expansion. He died in 1227 himself after defeating the Tanguts, and he left his successor and sons to handle everything. Don't think they're any better, however. His grandson told the Pope that he'd only protect Christian pilgrimage to Jerusalem if the Pope brought every king of Christendom to Khan to swear fealty. And his son committed one of the worst Mongol atrocities recorded against the Oryats. So I could go on, but we got more freaks to talk about. Your takeaway is don't mess with a Mongol. Ed Hardy fans, you'll know this one, the Krays. Dramatized in the 2015 movie Legends, these identical twins are unique in comparison to other criminal empire leaders. They ruled East End London with an iron fist during the swingin' 60s. Their criminal empire depended on robbery and protection rackets to thrive. The Krays and their associates would ensure compliance by readily resorting to arson, assault, and killings. The fear they inspired stopped even the most cowardly of snitches from saying a peep. They operated out of a nightclub and they were familiar figures on the street, but the streets are different during the day, and surprising to many, ordinary people who were untouched by the Krays' business interests actually revered them. They acted as a sort of local authority, helping people with their problems, debts, hurtful spouses, or failing homes. They guaranteed safety on the street and delivered it. It wasn't even just the ordinary people that admired the Kray brothers, but celebrities and politicians too. The police arrested them in 1968 after Ronnie's mental decline, caused by his refusal to take medication, led to the operation to make some sloppy mistakes. AKA, he literally killed 2 people at separate public events. 2 occasions, guys. Ronnie was sent to a high-security psychiatric facility due to his instability, but also his homosexuality. Unfortunately, that's how the times were. He died in 1995 while his brother died in 2000, 5 weeks after authorities released him from prison on a compassion ground for his terminal cancer. This Spanish family has lurid tales, but are they fact or are they fiction? The Borgias. Originally from Spain, the family became important in 15th century political and religious world. Caesar, the Borgias patriarch's father, was elected pope in 1492 of the titular church of Santa Maria Nova, making Caesar the archbishop and later the cardinal in 1492. Caesar, however, had no interest in religious vocation. He was better known at the papal court for his hunting parties and amorous liaisons and flashy clothes, rather than meticulous religious observations. On the death of Pedro Luis in 1488, the title of Duke of Granda had been handed past him and gone to his younger brother Juan. When Juan was mysteriously murdered in 1497, the rumor gradually spread that Caesar was the culprit. Ambitious and hungry for yet more power, the family included 2 popes, one of which was Alexander, the father of the famous Lucrezia. Her family was perfectly happy to use her as a pawn in their power plays. She entered into several arranged marriages, each one helped the Borgias extend their grip. She's also what inspired the belief that they really kept it in the family. After retiring to Naples after being a professional wife, Giovanni, dubbed the Roman infant, is seen at approximately age 3 for the first time. 2 papal bulls recognized the child as an illegitimate son of first Caesar, her uncle, and then of Alexander, her dad, who probably was the true father. The mysterious origin of the child, as well as her presence at a celebrated night group romp in the Vatican, has been used to support the rumors. You can learn more about this disastrous family in a 3-season TV drama literally named after them, the Borgias. Time to take life insurance policies out. We're meeting the Castro Angel Landing family. Ah, cult. You know, there had to be at least one coming up. They love to call themselves families after all. Angel's Landing is the name of of a 20-acre compound outside of Wichita, Kansas, where Lou Castro and a small group of people lived an inexplicably extravagant life in the early 2000s. His followers were convinced he was an angel seer who saw the future and knew how people were gonna die. Turns out the reason he knew was because he was gonna be the one making it happen. Patricia Hughes showed up dead in 2003, and police turned their attention to the secluded luxury compound. There were high-end vehicles and appliances, well-kept lavish homes, pools, and just a lot of wealth that wasn't accounted for or could be explained. Then Patricia's husband dies in 2006 on compound once again by a freak accident, and Ron Goodwin dived into every bit of personal and financial information he could find on the people living at Angel's Landing. Turns out our buddy Castro took out expensive life insurance policies on certain cult members and had them cashed in by other members when someone in the makeshift family accidentally died. This pattern occurred around every 2 years and for about a decade, unnoticed. Turns out his name wasn't even Lou Castro, but Daniel Perez, a man from Texas with many police reports. Perez was charged with 28 felonies, and in February 2015 he was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 80 years in prison. The cult was later profiled on an episode of Oxygen's Deadly Cult. Next up is Lucky Luciano. We love a fun and flirty nickname, one he earned for success at evading arrest and winning craps games. Lucky was the most powerful chief of American organized crime in the early 1930s and a major influence even from prison and after deportation to Italy. At 10 he was already involved in muggings, shoplifting, extortion. After a 6-month jail sentence when he was a teen, Lucky teamed up with Frank Costello and Mayor Lansky and other young gangs, and later New York's rising crime boss Joe Masseria, who he becomes second-hand man to. In October of 1929 he becomes the rare survivor of a one-way ride when he's abducted by 4 men in a car, beaten, stabbed, had his throat slit from ear to ear, and was left for dead. But he survived and never named his abductors. Metal. Lucky had carefully nurtured his contacts with the young powers and had become the boss of all bosses without ever accepting or claiming the title. By 1934, he and the leaders of other crime families had developed the National Crime Syndicate. In 1936, Lucky was indicted, tried, and convicted for his brothels and call girl empire, and was sentenced to Clinton prison for a 30 to 50-year term. From his cell, he continued to rule and issue orders, and in 1942, the luxury liner Normandy was destroyed in the New York Harbor, and Navy intelligence sought Luciano's help in tightening waterfront security. Lucky gave the orders, and sabotage on the docks ended, and in 1946 his sentence was commuted and he was deported to Italy, where he settled in Rome. He then bounced from Cuba to Naples and continued his crime empire until he died of a heart attack in an airport in Naples, Florida in 1962.
In our number 5 spot today we have the Brutal Benders, also known as the Bloody Benders. If their name didn't hint towards it, they were a family of who operated in Labette County, Kansas in the late 19th century. The family consisted of John Bender, his wife Elvira, and their adult children Kate and John Jr. They ran a small inn and a general store that became a popular stop for travelers passing through the area. However, the family was also known to rob and or kill their guests. Just a minor inconvenience if you want to stop in at the inn. They would lure travelers into their home, act friendly, and then completely switch on them. The family's crimes were eventually discovered in 1873, but they fled the area before they could be brought to justice. Lovely. What year was this again? I don't think they're alive anymore, thank God. Well, who knows? In our number 4 spot today we have Fred and Rose West. We've heard of Bonnie and Clyde, but what about Fred and Rose West? Ugh. The two were a married couple who committed a series of brutal killings in England during the 1970s and 80s. Their victims were usually women, and they buried their bodies in and around their home. The couple was thankfully arrested in 1994 after police discovered the remains of several victims. While awaiting trial, Fred took his own life in prison. Rose was found guilty of killing 10 people and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Definitely one of the worst when it comes to British criminal history. In our number 3 spot today we have the Cray twins. Ronnie and Reginald Cray. Where do I even begin here? On paper, these twins were lavish, they had very bubbly personalities, and were often associated with celebrities and politicians. Deep down, these British gangsters were much, much more. The Cray twins operated in London's East End during the 1950s and 1960s. They were involved in organized crime like protection rackets, arson, and they took a handful of lives. They were eventually arrested and sentenced to life in 1969 for killing Jack McVitie and George Cornell. The crazed legacy has been depicted in many films, books, and documentaries, and they remain among the most notorious figures in British criminal history. In our number 2 spot today, we have King Rudolph II. We'll do a little palate cleanser before we finish off out with big bad number 1. King Rudolph II, the Holy Roman Emperor in 1552. He was known as a collector of sorts. Some royals collect stamps, others collect zoo animals. Okay. His home was dangerous, to say the least. His castle was home to lions, tigers, and orangutans, so good luck getting 8 hours of sleep. Not gonna happen. He also liked to collect human artifacts. That one's a little bit more jarring than the zoo animals, right? I mean, literally, King Rudolph II had random bones and body parts in jars, all in the name of science. Watch out for the animal droppings and the jars of teeth. Welcome home. King Rudolph II is of course quite important in history as he supported the scientific revolution quite a bit, hence the jars. You know, he also poured tons of money into astrology. He's into the cosmos and the kidneys. What a guy, alright? He's got a lot of interests. In our number 1 spot today, we have Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka. We'll end on our least favorite Canadian couple, Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka. They committed a series of brutal assaults and killings in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Their victims included Homolka's sister, as well as several other young women. Absolutely disgusting. Bernardo was known for his inhumane acts in Scarborough. He even had a nasty nickname for them before his true, even more disgusting identity was revealed. The couple has since been dubbed the Ken and Barbie killers due to their wonder-bred appearance. Homolka had made a plea with prosecutors testifying against Bernardo in exchange for a reduced sentence. Meanwhile, Bernardo was eventually convicted of several charges and was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Hashtag by Ken.
Alright, so the Cambyses are up first. Cambyses was the son of Cyrus I and the successor of his father in Anshan as the king of Agistius of Media. According to the 5th century BC Greek historian Herodotus, Cambyses married a daughter of Astydius, by whom he became the father of Cyrus II. Cambyses II, aka Cyrus II, performed the ritual duties of the Babylonian king at the important New Year festival of 538 and of 530. Before Cyrus set out on his last campaign, he was appointed the regent in Babylon. That campaign was the conquest of Egypt, planned by Cyrus, and was a major achievement of Cambyses' reign once captured. This is the lunatic who liked to torture animals for entertainment and notoriously killed the Apis bull to torment the Greeks who worshipped it. Cambyses was traveling through Syria on his way back to Persia when he first heard reports of a revolt there, and then he died mysteriously in Syria in the summer of 522, either by his own hand or as the result of an accident. This is one of the few Persian families to have held the throne, the Xerxes line. First we have the granddaddy Xerxes I, or the Great as titled by the 5th Persian king. He was the son of Darius the Great, and his reign lasted from 486 BC to 465 BC. He's well known in history for his attempted invasion of Greece and how later in the same year he was defeated in the Battle of Salamis, which led him to flee his own kingdom. He's known as both a Persian ruler and a pharaoh, as when he ruled Egypt it was also part of the Persian Empire. Little is known about the last years of Xerxes' life. After his reversal in Greece, he withdrew into himself and allowed himself to be drawn into his harem intrigues, in which he was in fact only a pawn. Thus he disposed of his brother's entire family at the demand of the queen. He was assassinated by his own commander of the royal bodyguard forces. Another son, Artaxerxes I, succeeded in retaining power. Artaxerxes I was given the throne by the commander of the guard, Artabanus, who had killed Xerxes. It's fine though, cause Xerxes Jr. got his daddy's lick back when he kills Arta about a month later. His reign, though generally peaceful, was disturbed by several insurrections, the first of which was the revolt of his brother. During his reign, Artaxerxes completed the Hall of 100 Columns at Persepolis, rebuilt the palace of Darius I at Susa after a fire, and Artaxerxes died of natural causes in 424 BCE, having ensured a peaceful succession by naming Xerxes II his legitimate heir. Xerxes II reigned for only a little over a month, however, before he was assassinated. Next is the Dossier line. Starting with Dossi Dossier from the Second Kingdom, Egypt's 3rd dynasty. He undertook the construction of the earliest important stone buildings in Egypt. His reign, which probably lasted 19 years, was marked by great technological innovation in the use of stone architecture. The innovative structure was a departure from the traditional use of mud bricks alongside stone. The greatest advance, however, was the completion of alteration of the shape of a monument from a flat-topped rectangular structure known as a mastaba to a 6-stepped pyramid. This great character built the famous pyramid and set up the construction mechanisms of large buildings, paving the way for successors of their kingdom for even more daring constructions. The Pyramid of Dossier is the first pyramid in history of ancient Egypt and therefore potentially all of humanity. It is a degree pyramid that is at the center of a funerary complex of great importance. It's located in the necropolis of Saqqara. Sekhmet is probably the brother or eldest son of King Dossier. Little is known about this king since he ruled for only a few years. However, he erected a step pyramid at Saqqara and left behind a well-known rock inscription at the Wadi Maghara. No Pep in his servant steps for sure, it's Pepi. So, Pepi the First kills the game. He does a great job ruling Egypt. He initiated the policy of intensive penetration of Nubia, south of the First Nile Cataract. Inscriptions record journeys southward early in his reign, and fragments of vessels bearing the king's name were excavated in Karma. Meanwhile, Pepi II is the longest running Egyptian monarch, surviving 94 years on the throne. He's also believed to be the youngest ruler ever in Egyptian history. Pepi II was the son of Pepe I, obviously, and was born late into his father's reign. While he was still very young, he succeeded his half-brother Marine, who died at an early age. His mother served as regent for a number of years, and the old group of officials serving the royal family maintained the kingdom's stability. During the first half of his rule, he brought prosperity and grandeur to Egypt. Second half? Nowhere close. You see a sharp decline of the old kingdom as economic disarray is caused by him virtually having no oversight. Powerful provincial nobles drew talent away from the capital, and because of the unusually long reign of the king, Egypt had a senile ruler when it needed vigorous leadership. Those of Pepi's children who survived him had brief ephemeral reigns and failed to cope with the political and economic crisis that arose as the 6th dynasty ended. His tomb may be more famous than he is. Menkaures. His tomb, the Pyramid of Menkaure, is one of 3 pyramids of Giza, alongside his statue triads that show the king together with his wives and various deities. It's the smallest of the 3 main pyramids of Giza, just 62 meters tall, but has one of the most complex and best preserved structures. He had 2 wives, both are his sisters naturally, and they didn't have much luck with sons at first. 3 in total and 1 daughter. At his death, his successor, his son, Shafashkek, completed the stonework walls of the mortuary temple in brick. Menaku was not succeeded by his eldest son, who actually predeceased him, but rather by Shepsake, a younger son. Shepsake built a monumental mastaba at the South Accra and was the only kingdom ruler to not build a pyramid. This family's work, especially the Great Pyramids, show a great mastery of monumental stoneworking. Individual blocks were large or colossal and were extremely accurately fitted.
In our number 5 spot today, we have Prince John. It is said that this may be one of the darkest secrets of the British royal family. Prince John would have been the uncle of Queen Elizabeth II, but he passed before she was born. Prince John was the 6th child of King George V and Queen Mary, and it is said that he suffered from seizures, likely as a result of epilepsy, although it's hard to diagnose for certain because of all of the secrecies surrounding him and his illness. From the age of 4, when he had his first seizure, until his untimely and very early death, Prince John lived in a separate estate where he was cared for by a governess. Many people have since criticized the royal family, calling their treatment of Prince John as callous or inhumane, like they were hiding him away for being ill. Of course, the palace was concerned with the monarchy's public image, and there was a belief at the time that royals shouldn't have any physical or mental ailments, although that is of course impossible. They also didn't include him in public events, which could have been another image thing, and also perhaps because of a worry that he might have a seizure at one of these events. At the end of the day, it was definitely a different time, but the idea of excluding him because he was ill truly is a really sad thought. In our number 4 spot today, we have Marguerite and Blanche of Burgundy. This is a royal scandal that took place all the way back in 1314, and it starts off with the daughters-in-law of King Philip IV of France. I think that's the 4th, here's hoping. These young women, Marguerite and Blanche of Burgundy, were accused of having quite a scandalous affair with 2 brothers, Philippe and Gautier. So this already is some hot tea, but apparently when Queen Isabella of England, who is the daughter of King Philip of France, so I guess like sisters-in-law with these ladies. When she heard these stories, apparently she's the one who totally outed their affairs. It was obviously a huge deal and both of the women admitted to their adultery. This led to them being pretty much erased from public knowledge. They had their hair cut short and they were thrown in a dungeon, and even though Marguerite was meant to be the Queen of France through her marriage, when her husband ascended the throne, she stayed locked in the dungeon until the marriage could be annulled. Little is known about what happened to either of them after this point. However, it is believed that Marguerite passed away in 1315 and Blanche 1326. As for the men in this affair, well, they met quite a gruesome fate that involved the removal of their bits and pieces before their swift execution. In our number 3 spot today we have the Duggars. Alright, one of the most famous reality TV families, and even before the horrors of this family came to light, they were already a family that had fame due to quite a strange reason. If you're unfamiliar with who the Duggars are, you might be more familiar with the show that they used to have on TLC titled 19 Kids and Counting. Yeah, the show ran on TLC for 7 years until it was cancelled in 2015, and the show featured, well, the Duggar family. The family consisted of parents Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar and their 19 children, 9 daughters and 10 sons, all of whose names begin with the letter J. It was an interesting time, and they seemed like this huge, happy, religious family, but in the years since the cancellation of the show, some horrifying things came to light. Initially, the reason that TLC suspended and then subsequently cancelled the show is because it came to light that the eldest son in the family, Josh, had done some horrible things and acted violently, horrendously, and inexcusably against a number of girls, even some in his own family. Due to the popularity of the show before these serious stories came to light, there was a spin-off show that was created titled Counting On. This show first aired in December 2015 and stayed on the air for a surprising number of years before it was pulled, and the family yet again found themselves in the center of a scandal that had to do with Josh. This time he was caught in possession of a certain kind of tape that no one should have, and that should not even exist at all. I can't say which kind of tape, but just know it's the worst of the worst. These are, of course, some of the worst scandals that have surrounded the family, but truly, it's only a drop in the bucket of the many stories surrounding them. In our number 2 spot today, we have King Juan Carlos. The former King Juan Carlos of Spain, when he first ascended the throne in 1975, was highly looked upon. He was said to be bringing a new age for the country, an age of democracy. His reign lasted for quite a while, but by the time 2014 rolled around, he was forced to abdicate the throne. This was due to a few reasons. Firstly, his public ratings started to plummet after word spread of him being a bit of a womanizer and after an explosive affair, but also because of a lavish elephant hunting trip he took in the middle of an economic collapse. Okay, fair enough, I can see why people were getting their guard up a bit. So the king abdicated the throne in favor of his son Philippe, who sits on it to this day. During this time, however, the scandals in the family weren't only to do with Juan Carlos. In January of 2014, another of his children, his daughter Infanta Cristina, was charged with tax fraud. She has since been acquitted. That happened in 2017, but she was stripped of her title as the Duchess of Palma de Mallorca, and this whole deal had her leaving Spain and moving to Switzerland. The drama doesn't end here, however, because her husband actually was convicted in the case with charges that included embezzlement, fraud, and tax evasion, and he received prison time in 2018. In the end, none of the fraud charges have ever been linked back to the former king, but this entire debacle did cause the former ruler to move out of Spain. With his move came a letter, part of which read, quote, "Guided by the conviction to perform the best service to the Spanish people, their institutions, and you as king, I am communicating my thoughtful decision to move at this time outside of Spain. A decision I make with sadness, but with great serenity. I have been king of Spain for almost 40 years, and during all of them I have always wanted the best for Spain and for the crown." In our number 1 spot today, we have the Rothschilds. This family is easily one of the most, if not the most, powerful family in the modern era. In fact, it is said that most of us in the Western world don't even realize the impact this family has had on our lives, as our consumer-driven lifestyle is definitely directly related to the monetary systems this family put in place. This would include the United States Federal Reserve. Because of this insane amount of money and power that this family has held for over a century, there are plenty of conspiracy theories going on surrounding them. The conspiracies run deep, and they go quite dark. They touch on everything from assassination attempts, some successfully completed on sitting presidents, to heinous World War II agendas that would have benefited the family. Of course, they are conspiracies, so no one is quite sure which of these secrets, if any, are true. Even still, the stories and speculations swirl today, waiting for some piece of evidence to maybe bring them to light.
Number 10, the Kennedys. For the older folks at home, this is going to be no surprise, but for the younger audience such as myself, let me explain. The Kennedys were a wealthy and powerful family in the US. A lot of their scandals originating from organized crime, American politics, and some juicy rumors. The most famous Kennedy being JFK. My generation knows him from Call of Duty Black Ops 1. Remember 5? It was a good zombies map. The older generation remembers him for that one Sunday car trip in Dallas. You know what I'm talking about. He may have also been shacking up with Marilyn Monroe. His father was a bootlegger during the Prohibition era, and his family seems to have a lot of plane crashes. For some reason, I'm not sure why. The Kennedys are textbook scandalous and will be talked about for a long time to come. Number 9, the Jacksons. As much as I love fame and fortune, and baby, Chetty's all about that, I wanted to be famous ever since I was a tubby kid, and I'm slowly getting there too. Nice. I don't think I'll ever reach the same level as Michael Jackson. Seriously, I wouldn't be surprised if the first aliens that we meet know the moonwalk. Not because they're from outer space, but because the reach of Michael Jackson knows no bounds. Starting with the Jackson 5 in the 70s and rising to stardom and becoming the biggest star of the 80s and 90s. In the 2000s too. Growing up, he was pretty popular. Multiple allegations of misconduct don't look good on anyone, even for the king of pop though. He's got a few things stacked against him. Number 8, the Trumps. The billionaire extraordinaire turned POTUS is not shy from scandal. And I'm not talking about during his presidency either. I ain't gonna touch that. Some younger folks may not remember Donald Trump from the 80s and 90s, where he was arguably more famous. After getting a small loan of $1 million, built his real estate empire and perhaps broke a few laws and or using legal loopholes to get what he wanted. I mean, can you really trust the guy that slashed his name on everything? Trump Hotel, Trump Airlines, Trump Board Game. And that's just him, I guess. Number 7, the Rockefeller. Donald Trump might have been a billionaire or the most famous billionaire, but I still think J.D. Rockefeller takes the cake. And his family, actually. A little history lesson here. Rockefeller, in a nutshell, was the first modern billionaire. Bruce Wayne, Tony Stark levels of wealth. Seriously, he was pretty rich. When oil and gas became big business in the late 1880s because Industrial Revolution, cars, we need oil, his company, Standard Oil, slowly rose up until they had a monopoly on the oil industry. By cutting out middlemen and cornering the market, he amassed billions. Today, adjusted for inflation, his pockets were lined with a very healthy $23 billion. Say it again, $23 billion. That was all the way back then. Way before Elon Musk, Bill Gates, and Buffett did it. I wouldn't mind $23 billion myself. Sounds good, right? Oh, all the McDonald's I could have. Oh yeah. Number 6, the Coppolas. Imagine being a not so well-known director, then Marlon Brando walks in the room and goes, "Let's make a movie." The Godfather, great movie, right? Well, it seems that filmmaking runs in the family. Awesome. A whole family of people involved in film. You gotta love that. I love film, that's awesome. However, for those fans of The Godfather, which if you haven't seen it, please do. It's a masterpiece, go see it. What's not a masterpiece, however, is The Godfather 3. You can skip that one. I can just imagine the look on people's faces when they thought they were going to see a trilogy completed masterfully. It's a real stinker, folks, for many reasons, but a big one is Sofia Coppola, who plays Michael Corleone's daughter in the movie, which in real life is Francis Ford Coppola's daughter, the director of the movie. Imagine taking one of the best movie licenses of all time and almost single-handedly ruining that. Sorry, Dad. Number 5, the Kardashians. Everybody knows the Kardashians. Everybody and everyone knows that they've had tons of scandals. Kim Kardashian being married to Kanye West is just scandal by proxy. Come on, that guy's crazy. She also had a tape that got out. Not her best moment. Mr. Kardashian was a lawyer on the O.J. Simpson case where he may or may not have done it. And of course, Kris Jenner married Bruce Jenner, and who's now the fabulous Caitlyn Jenner, and her daughter was in a weird Pepsi commercial this one time, and this whole list could be about them, honestly. Strangely enough, for people who generally don't have talent in Hollywood, they sure get a lot of press. Which at some point is annoying, I'm sure. But be nice, paparazzi, or no Christmas presents. I know Santa Claus. And I'm keeping a list. It's early, but I'm keeping a list this year. Number 4, the Queen. Being the Queen of England is hard, or so I'm told. I mean, it must be kind of nice to sit in a big palace all day, eating cucumber sandwiches, and getting lost in such a big place. I know I would. I would get lost for sure. The royal family, however, are no saints and have their fair share of scandals. Prince Andrew has gotten himself into some trouble in recent tabloids. But for some who don't know, Prince Harry was quite the wild child 20 years ago. A prince on the loose, if you will. Not to mention the whole debacle with Princess Diana. The car accident is a little sus, not gonna lie. Even way back in the day when both world wars were on, there was some minor cover-up to hide the family's German heritage. Kinda hard to fight the Germans when your queens are one of the German. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. As long as there's a crown, there's always gonna be scandal. Number 3, Wally World. That's what my family calls Walmart. I don't know, that's just what we call it. The Walmart family is quite wealthy and tied to the Walmart Corporation, of course. And if you didn't know, Walmart doesn't have a squeaky clean track record. You mean a multi-billion-dollar department store located in over 20 countries around the world hasn't been to every rule and law applied to them? Oh, I'm shooketh. Not to diss Walmart, I love you guys. You got some good deals there, but there's no way anyone at home hasn't heard horror stories about working there. Come on, I know you're like, yeah, you're thinking about it right now, I know you are. On a more heinous note, Walmart's production methods are uncouth, as they use a version of labor I'm not allowed to say on YouTube. But in short, their clothes are cheaply made and then sold at a huge markup. But because the production was so cheap, you can walk in there and buy a shirt for $15 and you feel like you saved. You feel good. Oh, there's a McDonald's. I'm gonna go there later. Nice. It's great. I love capitalism. It's the best. Number 2, the Genovese. Probably the most infamous crime family to ever exist, or ask for protection money. One of the 5 families of New York, the Genovese family were wise guys, good fellas, tough guys, made men, part of the crew, and like Don Rickles said once, probably sat around all day and smelling their guns. I love Don Rickles. It would be difficult to quantify everything the crime family had going for them. What separates the Italian mafia from everyday hoodlums is that they are organized, hence the name organized crime. Profiteering off anything they could, really. Illicit substances, rackets, scams, gambling, and connections everywhere, really. Watch The Irishman. It's on Netflix. It's a good movie. You'll know what I mean. Hey Frank, what do you want to do later, Frank? Number 1, the Clintons. Hillary, don't come in the room. Probably the grooviest president ever to hold office. Bill Clinton was president around the time I was born, so I'm not that familiar with his politics and policies. And when I think of the late 90s, I think of Nintendo 64, Tony Hawk, and MTV, so it would be difficult for me to talk about that in any way, really. Is the Clinton family a bunch of wealthy American leaders who have some ill-gotten gains and email deleters? Yes, most likely, but you all know why this is number 1, don't you? Did you really think that me, Big Chetty, was going to talk about Clinton and not talk about his impeachment? Being one of only 3 presidents to have that process fully started. Interesting, I didn't know that. What were you guys thinking about? What were you talking about? There's nothing else he did wrong, right? He's innocent, he's good. Who? Monica Lewinsky? Who's that? She did what with his what?
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have King Henry VIII. We'll start off this list with some 1500s dating drama. I love it. The 4th wife of Henry VIII, Anne of Cleves, was married to King Henry for 6 months. It was seen as quite strategic, actually. See, Henry's chief minister convinced him to marry one of the sisters of Germany's duke, either Anne or Amelia. So in order to decide, Henry requested that Hans Holbein, famous painter, travel all the way to Cleves to paint a portrait of each sister. This is like ancient Tinder. It's wild. This man compared portraits for a few days and then finally chose Anne because every man praiseth her beauty. He even compared her to a silver moon. I've never heard Taylor compare me to the silver moon, so it seems like he's gonna step his game up. So eventually a treaty was signed and a few weeks later Anne arrived to England. Henry was beyond upset because when she arrived, she apparently looked nothing like the portrait. How horrible is that? It's 6 AM, you just met your new husband after traveling upriver by barge, and the dude has the audacity to say you don't resemble a Victorian painting. Awesome! He even tried to stop the wedding, but it was too late at that point, so they had to follow through. Imagine still having to follow through. On January 6, 1540, their marriage was official, but soon after Anne gladly accepted the divorce, then lived as the king's sister peacefully until her death in 1557. Historians believe that it was cancer. In our number 9 spot today we have King James. Before I dive into this one, guys, don't forget to hit that thumbs up if you're enjoying the video. It does really help us out. Not to be confused with LeBron James, this is a different king. In an official 16th century medical book, the actual medical advice at one point was to not bathe. Quote, "Use not baths or stews, nor sweat too much, for all openeth the pores of a man's body, and maketh the venomous air to enter, and for to infect the blood." First of all, huh? Why is every shred of medical knowledge from the past always written in riddles? God forbid you have bronchitis in the 16th century, a doctor would be like, "Ah yes, just a drop of ale and a witch's flick, you'll be well on your way." Like, bro, I have pneumonia, please help me. They thought that taking a bath would make you sick, so King James IV apparently just never took a bath, and his hygiene was so bad that he would sometimes pass on lice to others just by being in the same room as them. Even if he was in a room hours prior, but he would give you lice. Doesn't help that the guy had long hair. Guy's got Steven Tyler hair. It's like a lice lunchroom in here. Lice would emit off of this man. Margaret Tudor was married to King James IV. That must have sucked. So itchy. In our number 8 spot today we have King George V. When was the last time you saw a stamp? I haven't seen a stamp in months, but King George V? But he loved stamps. Maybe a bit too much. It was taking many hours out of his days, even when it shouldn't have been a priority at all. King George V continued to collect stamps during World War I. Everybody is trying to stay alive. George is just licking stamps in the library, adding them to collections. Like all collections, the king started at an early age, but in the end of his days, George had albums and albums and albums, so many stamps. He had around 330 albums, each with 60 pages full of stamps. That's so many stamps. In 1905, George set an all-time stamp record. It was the most money ever spent on a stamp. The man dropped like 220,000 on one stamp. That's some Logan Paul shit. So naturally, he was nicknamed the King of Stamps, or rather, the King of Philately. That's the official term for collecting stamps. Some stamp jargon for ya. There you go. Welcome to Bumblebee. We're learning. Smash that thumbs up. In our number 7 spot today, we have King Rudolph II. The Holy Roman Emperor from 1552, he was known as a collector. Some princes collect stamps, others collect zoo animals. A little more badass if you ask me. His castle was home to lions, tigers, and orangutans, so good luck getting a full 8 hours of sleep. He also collected human artifacts. So yeah, it's a bit odd, isn't it? Imagine having company, don't step in lion crap, and also don't mind the jars of eyes. Cheers! King Rudolph II, he's quite important in history. He supported the scientific revolution quite a bit. He also poured tons of money into astrology, so he was into cool stuff too, besides the kidneys and kangaroo collections. In our number 6 spot today we have King George IV. Voted as England's worst king by historians, let's do it! King George IV was too invested in his intimate conquests. He was focused on all the wrong stuff and he was also just horrible about it. This king tried everything to get a woman to sleep with him. He would throw tantrums if a crush wasn't interested, and sometimes he would threaten to end his own life if he didn't get their attention. Super creepy, because on top of the lengths he would go to just to get some time alone, he also kept some of their hair after the dirty deed was done. Yeah, he would ask everybody he slept with for a lock of their hair. Back then it was kinda common for lovers to keep locks of each other's hair, but George's collection was alarming because of just how many locks of hair there were. After the king died, his brothers found 7,000 envelopes, each with a lock of hair. Just envelopes of hair. The collection was, quote, enough to stuff a sofa. This insane collection is now in a museum in Scotland, so check that out if you want to feel sick.
At number 5, no bathing. These days, bathing is kind of a necessary thing. You gotta be clean, you have to smell nice, you have to practice proper hygiene. But back in the olden days, this was the complete opposite, and nobles rarely ever bathed, and it was kind of a trend. Over time, physicians began to believe that bathing was dangerous, and obviously the nobility tried to protect their lives and well-being at all costs, and so they just stopped bathing. In a popular 16th century medical book, it was advised, quote, use not baths or stews nor sweat too much. much. For all openeth pores of a man's body maketh the venomous air to open and for to infect the blood, end quote. So yeah, they thought that taking a bath would make you sick. In the late 15th century, Queen Isabella of Spain would go around bragging about the fact that she had only ever bathed twice in her whole life. Weird flex, but okay. King James IV apparently never bathed, and his hygiene was so bad that he passed on lice to other people who went into a room that was frequented by the king. He also never washed his hands before eating and would just rub his fingers with the wet end of a napkin. These people were gross. At number 4, Prankster King. You know that you're a spoiled king when you can pull pranks on people constantly and never have anyone try and stop you or fight back. This was basically the life of King Christian VII of Denmark, who was known for being pretty childish and playing pranks on people his whole life. He was a troublemaker through and through. He was known to play pranks on his grandmother by putting pins in her throne, and he would throw things at her, and he even ran through the streets with his friend and his mistress, destroying shops and patronizing brothels. He even made his own torture rack, had himself tied to it, and flogged. Why? I have an idea, but I don't want to think about that one too hard. One of the other weird things that he was known to do was leapfrog over dignitaries when they would bow to him. This guy was really quite immature. At number 3, saints in bed. I understand the desire to feel protected by whatever gods or saints you might believe in. That's one of the whole points of religion. However, I think some people can take that idea a little bit too far, and by some people I mean the Spanish royal family. These guys took religion very, very seriously, and they believed that following religion heavily would allow God to heal them when they were sick. So, when a member of the royal family was ill, doctors would remove body parts or even entire corpses of saints from churches and monasteries and would put them in bed with the person who was ill. Yeah, they slept with the corpses of dead saints to be healed of their sickness. Could you imagine if that was still how medicine was practiced today? At number 2, rat court-martial. There has been a record of many kings throughout history who were complete children through and through. Even though many of them grew into adulthood, they still acted immature, and one of the greatest examples of that was Peter III of Russia. He was not a good ruler or a good husband to his wife, who would later become Catherine the Great. Peter spent every night in bed with her playing toy soldiers because he was obsessed with his little dolls. He was so obsessed, in fact, that when a rat chewed the head off one of his toy soldiers, he was so upset that he held a proper military court-martial for the rat. He proclaimed the rat guilty of treason and had it hung in a tiny gallows that he had built for the occasion. It was weird, but in the end that bizarre event helped Catherine overthrow her husband, so I guess it kind of worked out for someone. And finally, at number 1, groom of the stool. Guys, I found the worst job in history. You think working at the 1-star Domino's Pizza in your neighborhood is bad? Wait until you find out about the groom of the stool. The groom of the stool was a job created during the reign of Henry VIII, where the role was to monitor and assist the king in his bowel movements. They would carry around a commode at all times, and they were also tasked with monitoring the king's diet and meal times, and would organize the king's days around his break times. They were also tasked with undressing the king for him to do his business, and it's also been suggested that they would have had to, quote, cleanse the royal posterior as well. Sounds like a pretty crappy job to me, but I'm not funny, I'll leave.